A Time of War. King of Winter. Summary. It has been 16 years since the events of Rickard's rebellion shook the realm. In the north, Eddard Stark rules contentedly while the ghosts of the past become but a fading memory. In the south, the realm is uneasy and the stirrings of war are beginning. Rickard Stark has been missing for 4 years, and players have rushed to fill the void he has left behind. Chaos is breeding, and how much longer will it be before the realm bursts into war? The sequel to The Fall of Dragons. Recommended to read that first before reading this. Notes. So, I'm back. Thank you all for your support and commentary on The Fall of Dragons, it was really appreciated. Here is the second arc. For those of you that read the part which I scrapped, you might notice a few things have changed, and a few things haven't. One thing I have changed, is that I haven't named all the relationships. I will name them as we come to them, and while most of them are planned, some aren't. Leave a suggestion for your favorite character and I'll see what happens. And to whoever asked for more's Cutthroat Castle, so sorry, I forgot who asked, he is coming. I have a plan for him and know how to work him in. So keep your eyes peeled. Let me know what you think of this. Leave a comment. It really means the world to me and keeps me inspired to keep writing. And finally, massive thanks to my beta readers, Cliffhanger247 and Barman5ev, who this would never have happened without, and special mention to King_of_Kings for encouraging me and listening to me talk about all my crazy ideas. Chapter 1. Chapter Text. Ashura I. Ashura had loved the Godswood of Starfall. It was a bright, cheery place, more garden than wood, sunny and airy, and filled with the chirping of birds and the buzzing of bees. Warm winds drifted through the towering trees, and the smell of flowers lingered in the air. The Starks kept a different sort of Godswood. Theirs was a dark place of primal worship, 3 acres of ancient forest that had remained untouched by human hands for 10,000 years as first a castle, and then a city had grown up around it. It smelt of moist earth and decay, and death lingered in every shadow. No flowers grew here and many different trees towered above her, soaring towards heaven's heights, including oaks and ironwood trees. The floor was blanketed with 10,000 years of humus, providing a soft surface to walk upon. This was a place of dark shadows and darker worship, and the gods who lived here had no names. It was before the heart tree that she found him, knelt next to the ancient skeleton that would celebrate its 300th birthday very soon. It was the skeleton of the rapist that Brandon Snow had executed on that fateful day 300 years ago, left here for every Stark to gaze upon, to be reminded of where they had come from and where they were going. The skeleton was covered in creepers and dirt, and now very little could be seen but for the man's grinning skull and his rib cage. Like the gaze of the heart tree, the skeleton's empty sockets seemed to bore right through a man, gazing at his innermost being. Ashura had never felt comfortable under his gaze. She shifted her gaze to her husband, who was kneeled before the heart tree in ancient prayer. Ice was held in his hands, the blood of the deserter he had executed this morning still staining its smoking depths. Ned's mouth moved as he prayed to his gods, and for a second Ashura regretted having to disturb her husband. Ned, she called softly. She saw her husband's mouth stop moving. After a moment, his eyes opened and he turned to her with a soft smile, though Ashura thought she saw a hint of sadness behind them. Ashura, Ned greeted as he lowered his sword into the black pool of water beneath the heart tree and washed it clean of the blood that stained it. A raven has arrived from the king, she told him, thinking of the moment that Maester Lewin had arrived with the letter. He's dead then? Ned asked, his voice filled with sorrow. Ashura nodded softly, understanding the sadness in her husband's voice. Jon Arryn had been like a father to him, and Ned had loved the old lord dearly. She knew it had torn him apart on the inside to have to stand back and watch as men had conspired to kill him. The bloody accords were clear though, and Rickard Stark had already warned them against breaking them again. Ned sighed heavily and dried his blade with moss he pulled from the rock next to him. I want to kill him, he snarled, and that Tully whore too. Ashura knew Ned must have been furious if he had found the courage to say that. Ned had always been regretful of how the Tullys had been treated by his father and had done his best to repair the fractured relationship between their houses. House Tully had taken the gold and resources the Starks offered but refused their apologies. Ned had been forever repentant, but it was to no avail. The Tullys still loathed him as much as ever. You can't, Ned. Ashura replied softly as she moved to his side. The accords are clear. I know, he whispered as he placed his sword back in its sheath. But I still want to. It wouldn't take much. No, but we can't. Ashura told him as she placed her hand on his arm. Ned nodded, but she saw the bitterness on his face. She suspected they would be arguing over this for the next few days and wondered if perhaps he would be the one to win this argument. There's more, she murmured as she leant into his side and handed him the scroll. She watched as he read the parchment, and the way the skin around his eyes tightened and his lips pursed. Robert is coming here? He asked, and Ashura nodded in confirmation. You know what he will want, don't you? She asked him, and he nodded gravely. Why else would he take a month-long trek from the capital? He means to make me Hand of the King. He does, Ashura responded, her heart heavy with the weight of his decision. I will meet him at Moat Cailin, Ned declared. I will not have him in the halls of Winterfell after he called you a whore and tried to kill our son. Ashura winced at his words. Ned, you can't do that. Robert will be coming to Winterfell. Anything less would be a grave insult to him. His wife is said to be prickly enough already. Don't do anything to anger them, she advised. Fucking Lannisters, Ned muttered as he trailed his hand through the pool. More news arrived, Ashura informed him. Your brother sent a raven. Ned's mood lifted almost immediately, and a small smile graced his features. He loved hearing word of his brother and went up to visit him in Hardham every few years. Benjen? He asked, what news did he send? Has he completed the task I set for him? Grave news, Ashura replied, and Ned's mood soured as quickly as it had cured. What now? He asked, with a hint of fatigue in his frame. A wilderling army has gathered beyond the wall. There is stirrings of a new king beyond the wall. Mance Rayder, Benjen called him. Ashura shivered just to hear his name. Ned's father, Rickard Stark, had set up 4 lordships in the lands beyond the wall. Hardham, Lord Benjen Hart Stark's domain, was the last of them. The other settlements had not done well, and the other survivor, Fort First Fist, had been abandoned 3 years ago after it had come under attack by the Thans. Ned nodded. I will send a raven to Benjen immediately. He can visit Winterfell, visit the king and pick up some troops while here. Ned stopped for a moment, and Ashura saw him pondering something. I shall send Jon with them, he announced, and Ashura's heart plummeted. Jon was their eldest son and heir, and the leader of the wolf pack. He spent his days with the other heirs and second sons of the North, building the bonds that set the North apart from the South. The wolf pack was the reason the lords of the North were so loyal to the Starks of Winterfell. They were all raised as brothers, and the trying circumstances of their lives bred them to put petty differences aside. Not Jon, she exclaimed, he is not ready. He needs the experience. Ned replied gravely. Better for him to gain it against the hands of ill-armed wildlings than the steel of southern knights. Ashura's heart twisted in her chest. The memories of another war, an older war, filled her mind. Memories of arms that were missing and an empty heart. How are the rest of the children? He asked her, and her heart filled with love for him. Her and Ned had been busy following Rickard's rebellion, and now had 5 children together. Their eldest was Jon, a brilliant swordsman who was beginning to show the makings of a wonderful Lord of Winterfell. The second eldest, and second son, was Artos Stark. He had been born in 286 AC, and like Jon, was an incredible swordsman, though Artos was more prone to bouts of impulsiveness. Ned said the wolf blood was strong in him. Then Ashura had given birth to her twins, the ones who had the most wolf blood of any of her children. Arya and Deanna Stark had been born in 289 AC, and both were wild girls that preferred playing with the boys than wearing dresses. Ashura's youngest was her quietest child. His name was Alaric, and though only 6, he was a very sour little boy. He had been aptly named, Ashura thought, for the last Alaric Stark had also been of a sour temperament. They are well, Ashura replied to Ned. Arya and Deanna got caught stealing from the sweet shop again with Vorian. Ned laughed. Of course, they did, he said before his expression changed. But they shouldn't have taken Vorian with them. He is sickly enough as it is. Vorian Dane was Ashura's nephew, the son of Arthur. While officially no one knew who Vorian's mother was, in reality it was Elia Martell, who remained hidden in Mount Starpoint. Arthur had persistently pursued Elia for years with Ashura's encouragement, and in 289 AC, he had finally succeeded in convincing her to marry him. In 290 AC, Elia had defied the expectations of all the Maestas and given birth to another baby boy, Vorion. Vorion though had inherited his mother's sickliness, and often ran out of breath. He could not run like the other boys, and thus was often left out of their games. Arya and Diana, who also found themselves left out of the boys' games, had taken him under their wing when he had arrived in Winterfell at 6 years of age. They had been closest cousins ever since. "He will be fine," Ashura consoled, "the fresh air will do him well." The two sat in comfortable silence for a moment, enjoying the quiet sanctity of what was a beautiful morning. "What of your father?" Ashura asked after a moment. "What of him?" Ned asked, his voice tense. "Will you tell him?" "Knowing him, he most likely already knows." "Should we invite him back to Winterfell?" Ashura asked. "No," Ned replied, "you don't invite my father anywhere. He goes where he pleases, and woe to any man that steps in his way." After a moment more, Ned sighed and got to his feet. "We must prepare for Robert's coming," he said, "we need to organize much." He helped Ashura to her feet and linked his arm with hers. Together the husband and wife left the Godswood to prepare for the coming of the king, and the ensuing storm that always followed in Robert's wake. Chapter 2, Robert I, the King Comes North. Summary. Robert travels north. Notes. Yes, as many of you pointed out last chapter, one of Ned and Ashura's children has disappeared. And yes, it was Lyra. She no longer exists, forget she ever happened. Sorry for the confusion. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. And if you want Lyra back, let me know too. I sort of have a plan for her, but it wasn't as detailed as the other siblings, which is why I cut her out. I can bring her back if wanted. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Robert I. Gods, it felt good to be out of the capital, riding along like he did in the days of old. The wind whistled around them, blowing his long hair away from the sides of his face. Robert had missed this immensely, the feel of cool air on his cheeks. Robert hadn't felt air this cool since he had left the Eyrie with Jon all those years ago, when Gulltown still needed to be put down and Aerys yet sat on the throne. Those were better days. They were days when a man could pick up his hammer, mount his horse and fight his way through life. Now Robert was stuck inside, dealing with all the shit that came with being a king. Ever since Jon had died, it had gotten even worse. Everything that Jon had once dealt with, Robert now had to. It was why he needed Ned so much. Ned would serve him well, he always had. It was Ned who had stopped Randyll Tarly from reinforcing Rhaegar at the Trident, and it was Ned who had captured Rhaegar as well. It was Ned who talked Balon Greyjoy down from rebelling when rumors were circulating the realm 9 years ago. It was from Ned who Robert had borrowed 500,000 dragons when the realm had been in need. Ned had always been there for Robert, him, and always would be. His best friend's only problem was his wife. Ned would do anything for the woman, something declared in the songs the bards sung of him. They sung of the Wolf Lord who had fought his way across a realm just to marry the love of his life. It was the stuff of legends, and Ned and his father were both living legends nowadays. Robert may have won the crown, but Ned had won the battles and Rickard had won the war. It was called Rickard's rebellion after all, not Robert's. Behind him, Robert heard something break and he groaned. If Ned's wife was a problem, Robert's own wife was hell on earth. The great gilded carriage she had demanded be brought had broken yet another axle, and Robert was about to tear his hair out from frustration. That damned carriage had made their journey twice as long as it could have been. It seemed like they stopped twice a day because of it. What's happened now? Robert bellowed as he wheeled his horse around. Cersei emerged from the carriage and placed one of her feet onto the cobblestoned road. If there was one thing that Ned had done better than the South, it was his bloody roads. They were all cobbled, and since getting on the part of the northern road at Moat Cailin, their journey had been sped up considerably. The golden-haired woman scowled at him darkly. For someone with such a pretty face, she certainly knew how to be ugly. She raised her nose at him before turning around and getting back into the wheelhouse wordlessly. "Stupid cunt," Robert muttered at her retreating figure before yelling for someone to fix it. He swung his horse around and headed back to the front of the column where he could wait in peace. As he rode, Robert glanced around him at the stunning countryside. This was true freedom, he surmised, the freedom to go where you pleased, when you pleased, how you pleased. The Storm King wished someone else had have taken the crown from him. Ned would have made a much better king. One just had to look at the state of his realm to see what an effective ruler he was. Ned's castles were beautiful yet practical and imposing, commanding the respect and attention of any who entered the north. This trip was the first time the king saw the feared fortress, Moat Cailin, and he suddenly understood why the north was the only kingdom of the first men to have never fallen to the Andal invaders. It was a bastion of strength, composed of 20 towers and curtain walls taller than any Robert had even seen before. It housed a garrison as large as that of the city watch of King's Landing, and was serviced by a small army of smiths, fletchers and armorers who were constantly pumping out new weapons. Its walls were covered with catapults and scorpions, and they all aimed down a very narrow causeway that any invading army would be forced to march up. It was a death trap for any who dared to attack it. What amazed Robert even more though was that the maesters said that the castle had been in ruins for hundreds of years up until the rule of Cregan Stark, the Old Man of the North. The countryside of Ned's realm was littered with farmhouses and small towns while expansive fields of crops filled every pasture. What grassland wasn't filled with the North's yields was populated with great herds of furred cattle or large flocks of sheep. The forests of the North were vast, and the roads well made. The North was a realm of wealth and power, and it was no wonder that they had been the ones to throw the Targaryens from their throne. Robert had only seen a small fraction of the continent's northernmost realm, and that had not included the famed Wolf's Moor, or the mines of Lonely Mountain, or the navies of the western and eastern coasts, or even the domain of the lord beyond the wall, Hardham. Thoughts of Hardham turned Robert's mind to its lord, Benjen Hardstark, Ned's younger brother. He wondered how the little man was doing. He had been just 14 when Robert had met him at Harrenhal and was a youth with laughing eyes. He wondered if Benjen still had his laughing eyes or if the lands beyond the wall had forged him into someone who was as hard as the lands he ruled. Someone like Stannis. The king shuddered to think of his brother. The man was as stern and unforgiving as any Robert he had ever met. Robert wondered if he would meet the smuggler that had his fingers taken by Stannis. They said he was in service to Ned's son, Jon, now. Stannis had fled back to Dragonstone after Jon Arryn's death, and every raven had been met with stony silence. That did not bode well. Perhaps he could find a new master of ships while he was up here. A Salt Stark perhaps, or even a Marndaeli. Behind him came the news that the carriage was fixed, and Robert whooped in delight. He kicked his horse's sides hard and it galloped forward, on towards Winterfell and Ned. Next to him rode his Kingsguard who came from the north, and the one he trusted the most, Mark Ryswell. Mark had been given the White Cloak in the aftermath of Ricard's rebellion, and was the first to serve in the White Cloaks without a knighthood. He was the only one in Robert's Kingsguard whose loyalty was to the king first. The rest of them belonged to either Cersei or their own hip pockets. Sir Barristan was the exception, but he had been loyal to the Targaryens first and Robert didn't trust him over Mark. Next to Mark rode Lord Torrhen Stark, Robert's northern representative on his small council as per the terms of the peace treaty he negotiated with Rickard Stark. They mocked Robert behind his back for that treaty, but the king didn't care. Ned had always been loyal, and if he had have asked him, Robert would have given him his crown as well. What was a mere treaty to that, even if it demanded more than the average monarch would have given? The three rode in silence along the King's Road ahead of the main group and towards the distant walls of the Winter City and the spires of Winterfell, enjoying their surroundings. For Mark and Torrhen this was their first time home in almost 16 years. It was a sweet reunion for them, to be sure. "Look, Mark," Torrhen called as he pointed to a grey fort within the city walls, "there is the Wolf Fort." Mark burst out into a grin and looked at the distant fort with a sense of sentimentality. "There she is," he agreed, "our old hunting grounds." "Old hunting grounds? What do you mean?" Robert asked. "That's where all of us grew up. In the north, all the young nobles are raised together alongside the future Lord of Winterfell." Torrhen explained. "You mean you fostered there? Every single one of you?" "Aye," Mark confirmed. "And they were the greatest days of my life. Every day we were going somewhere new with Brandon, getting into trouble and having new adventures. Then Brandon, the wolf-blooded, gallant fool that he was, rushed off with half of our wolf pack to King's Landing. Many of our brothers joined him, never to be seen again. We avenged them though, Torrhen said. A seriousness sat in his tone that was not normally there. You did. Robert agreed. And then you warned the world of your wrath. The first time Robert had seen that weirwood tree with Roriger's face looking over King's Landing, he had felt a savage sense of anger. He had wanted to be the one to kill him. Over the years though, as he had aged and his body weakened, he had found great comfort in Roriger's screaming face. It was a death more painful than any Robert could have given him, and the green men who tended to the tree informed Robert that Roriger's soul was most likely still trapped within the white branches and red leaves. It was a mockery of life deserving of the man that had stolen the woman he loved. We most probably should wait for the others to catch up before we arrive at the Winter City's gates, Mark said, and Torrhen cracked a grin. Why, he asked, let's just ride in ourselves and leave Prince Ponce to deal with the savage northern masses all by himself. Mark burst out laughing, and even though Robert tried not to, he cracked a grin. Prince Ponce was what Torrhen had called the Crown Prince, Robert's son Joffrey, for years now. Robert would have and should have been offended, but for the most part he actually agreed with Torrhen. Joffrey was a Ponce, and Torrhen had the balls to say it to the king's face, something Robert respected him immensely for. Torrhen was the reason why he liked Northerners. They told it as it was and didn't fill their speech with flowery words that meant nothing. As they waited, Torrhen turned back to Robert. Who are you going to ask to be hanged if Ned refuses? Robert frowned at the member of his small council. Ned won't refuse me, he said angrily. Ned has always been loyal to me. Mark winced on Robert's other side, and Robert glared at him. What? The rotund man snapped. With all due respect, your grace, last time you saw Ned you didn't depart on the best of terms. Robert, to this day, had regrets about his and Ned's last meeting. Robert had been stupid and a fool, and he had paid dearly for it. I signed their treaty, didn't I? Robert asked testily. What more can they want? Robert, last time you saw him you tried to kill his son. That is not something that is just forgotten, Mark said softly. Robert cringed at himself as he remembered his rage-fueled attack on the little babe. I got it wrong, Robert admitted before raising his head and looking Mark in the eye, and the first thing I will do when I see Ned is fall on my knees and beg his forgiveness. And what if Ned decides he can't leave the North? Torrhen asked, his tone serious. The role of Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell is a large one. Cregan managed it and so can Ned. Robert responded. Cregan managed it for 6 days, Mark replied. Then I will ask Daenerys in. Robert roared before continuing, clearly frustrated, but I don't believe for 1 second that Ned cannot hand over his duties to his son and come south for me. Torrhen's face fell dramatically and he clutched his heart in mock hurt. And here I was thinking I was his second choice. He muttered to Mark. Robert burst out laughing at the antics of the northern representative, and the three shared a few final, good moments before the rest of the royal retinue arrived. Together once again, the retinue rode on and into the Winter City. Notes. I know that so far this isn't that different to what I originally posted, but stick with me please. And please, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Chapter 3, Ned I, the King Who Knelt. Summary. Robert arrives in Winterfell. Please leave a comment and tell me what you think. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ned I. Ned waited patiently in the courtyard beside his family as they waited for the king's arrival. Though Ned was the picture of calmness, inside he was tearing himself apart. What did you say to a best friend who called your wife a whore and tried to kill your infant son? How was Ned meant to respond to that? Should he kneel or should he follow his father's example and refuse? Ned hadn't seen Robert in 16 long years, not since that fateful day all those years ago when Robert had swung his warhammer at Ned's own son. They had left on bad terms and neither had done anything to repair the relationship since. He felt Ashura's hand lightly touch his before she entwined her fingers with his. He turned his head and smiled at her. She smiled softly back. The years had been kind to his wife, and she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. He pressed a kiss to the top of her forehead before inspecting the line of his children. Jon stood first in line, his firstborn son. He was almost 16 now and a brilliant swordsman and skilled leader of men. His wolf pack, a group of boys 150 strong, were utterly devoted to him and had ridden with him from Carhold to Riversmore, as well as going with John to Bravos for 3 months a year back. John's closest companion, Rob Snow, Brandon's bastard son, stood slightly behind him at his right shoulder. The two were as close as any man could be, and their relationship reminded Ned of the relationship he shared with Robert when they lived in the Vale. Artois was standing tall next to John, his wild gaze unusually brooding. Something was bothering him, though what it was, Ned had no clue. Ned only hoped it didn't cause trouble with any of the royals. Arya and Deanna stood next to him, and, amazingly, neither of them had disappeared the entire morning, a new accomplishment for both. Ned didn't know what Ashura had threatened them with, but it had been bloody effective. Next to them stood Alaric, his little face screwed up with a seriousness that not even Ned had expressed as a babe. He was aptly named to be sure. A call came from the gatehouse and the entire household stiffened as the king's retinue entered. The visitors poured through the castle's gate in a river of gold and silver and polished steel, 350 strong, a pride of bannermen and knights, of sworn swords and freeriders. Over their heads whipped the banners of House Baratheon and House Lannister, gold and black and gold and red. Ned knew many of the riders. There was Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, and Sandor Clegane with his terrible, burnt face. Ned knew how Sandor had gotten that burn, and it wasn't a pretty story, nor was it one that was told to the masses. Next to Sandor rode a tall boy who could only have been Prince Ponce himself. Behind them rode the short, stunted form of Tyrion Lannister, the imp. It was at the head of the column though that Ned spotted those he recognized most. First was Mark Ryswell in his brilliant white cloak, flapping in the wind, while next to him rode Torrhen Stark, Lord of Autumnfell and the northern representative on the small council. In front of them rode a man that Ned almost did not recognize. It was one thing to hear stories of what Robert Baratheon had become, it was another to see it with his own 2 eyes. Ned! The huge man roared as he vaulted off a long-suffering horse. Ah, but is it good to see that frozen face of yours? Would that Ned had been able to say the same, but he couldn't, not with the history and bitterness that existed between them now. Ned dropped to one knee, and his household followed suit. "Winterfell is yours, your grace," he said, his voice as formal as ever. "No," Robert roared as he pulled Ned back to his feet. "It is I who must fall to my knees before you, old friend." And then, to Ned's amazement, Robert did just that. "Forgive me, Ned," Robert beseeched, "for all the wrongs I did your family and your kingdom all those years ago." So surprised was Ned that he was struck speechless for a moment. This was not the Robert he remembered. 15 years passed, when they had ridden forth to win a throne. The Lord of Storm's End had been clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and muscled like a maiden's fantasy. 6.5 feet tall, he towered over lesser men, and when he donned his armor and the great antlered helmet of his house, he became a veritable giant. He'd had a giant's strength too, his weapon of choice a spiked iron warhammer that Ned could scarcely lift. In those days, the smell of leather and blood had clung to him like perfume. He had a temper too, and an unwillingness to ever admit that he was wrong, especially when he was in his cups. Perhaps that was what this was. Perhaps Robert was drunk. Mark had warned him that the king had become extremely partial to drink. "How much have you had to drink today, Robert?" Ned asked. He saw a genuine flash of hurt cross Robert's face. It was then that Ned knew Robert was being sincere. Ned grabbed his friend's arm and pulled him to his feet. "You're not drunk," he stated. Robert nodded. Ned looked deep into his old friend's eyes and saw true regret in them. Robert had never done well at masking his emotions, much like Ned. Over the years though, and under his wife's tutelage, Ned had gotten much better. Robert hadn't, it seemed. "All is forgiven, your grace. But I am not the only one you need to apologize to." Ned gestured to his left, where his wife stood waiting patiently. A flash of guilt crossed Robert's face and he turned to greet Ashura while Ned turned his gaze to the rest of the retinue. By now, the others were dismounting as well and grooms were coming forward to take care of the horses. Robert's queen, Cersei Lannister, stepped down from the carriage. Though she wore a smile on her face, her eyes gave away the truth of her feelings. She was flanked by her younger children who looked around shyly. Cersei made her way over to Ned and he knelt before her while Robert greeted Ash warmly, though there was still a tenseness in the air between them. While Ned kissed Cersei's ring, Robert greeted the rest of his children. Robert returned to Ned once he had greeted them. "Take me down to your crypts, Ned," he demanded. "I would pay my respects. We have had a long journey. Surely the dead can wait." Cersei responded. Robert turned a gaze on her so cold that even Ned shivered before it. Wordlessly her brother appeared in his white cloak, took her by the arm and led her away. Ned led Robert the other way, towards the crypts where the love he thought he had lay. They entered the winding, narrow staircase and made their way down to Lyanna's crypt. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the statues of Brandon and Lyanna. "She was more beautiful than that," Robert said after a moment, his voice hoarse with grief. "Ah, damn it, Ned, did you have to bury her in a place like this? She deserved more than darkness. She was a Stark of Winterfell." "Her place is here," Ned explained quietly. "Her place was by my side, but Rhaegar took her from me," Robert replied. "Rhaegar is dead now. Let the dead lie in peace. In my dreams, I kill him every night, and during my waking hours, I spend time just staring at that face upon the tree, content with the eternal pain he is suffering," Robert admitted. Ned didn't know how to respond, so he stayed silent. After a while of sorrowful quiet, he spoke. "We should return, Your Grace. Your wife will be waiting." "The others take my wife," Robert responded sourly. "And no more of this Your Grace business. You are more to me than that." Ned didn't respond, his thoughts still filled with the day he had arrived with Lyanna's bones and his infant son that Robert had tried to kill in the name of his dead sister. "Ned," Robert asked, "what's wrong?" They stopped walking and Ned pondered on how to respond. "Tell me of Jon," he eventually said, though it wasn't what bothered him. "I have never seen a man sicken so quickly," Robert relayed with a shake of his head. "Was it poison?" Ned asked, and Robert's head shot up. "Of course not. The Maester assured me it was a sickness of the bowels," Robert replied. Robert was blind to the treasonous snakes within his own household. And Ned mourned for the boy he had loved. He knew they would turn their gaze on him next. Ned didn't bother asking about Jon's wife, he already knew all he had to know with her. He would have his vengeance on her one day. "Who will you name Warden of the East?" Ned asked. "Cersei thinks I should name Jaime Lannister," Robert said, and Ned shook his head in disbelief. "And what of Daenerys?" he asked. "Have you forgotten him?" "Of course not. I was about to tell you that I instead planned on naming him regent for Jon's son and Warden of the East," Robert replied angrily. "That was good, except for one problem: Jon's son didn't exist. Robin Arryn was no Arryn but a stone. Daenerys was the true heir to the Vale and deserved more than being named regent for the offspring of a petty lord that had no place in the Aerys' hallowed halls." Ned nodded seriously, though not betraying the roiling emotions that raged within him. "Enough of this. There is a more important office to discuss, and I would not argue with you." Robert grasped the other man by the elbow. "I have need of you, Ned. I am yours to command, Your Grace. Always." They were words he had to say, and so he said them, apprehensive about what might come next. Robert scarcely seemed to hear him. "Those years we spent in the Eyrie Gods, those were good years. I want you at my side again, Ned. I want you down in King's Landing, not up here at the end of the world where you are no damned use to anybody." Robert looked off into the darkness, for a moment, appearing as melancholy as a Stark. "I swear to you, sitting a throne is 1,000 times harder than winning one. Laws are a tedious business and counting coppers is worse. And the people, there is no end of them. I sit on that damnable iron chair and listen to them complain until my mind is numb and my ass is raw. They all want something, money or land or justice. The lies they tell, and my lords and ladies are no better. I am surrounded by flatterers and fools. The only true men around me are Torrhen and Mark." Ned tried his hardest not to wince. Not even they were as true as Robert supposed. It can drive a man to madness, Ned. Half of them don't dare tell me the truth, and the other half can't find it. There are nights I wish we had lost at the Trident. "Ah, no, not truly, but—" "I understand," Ned said softly. "I think you do. If so, you are the only one, my old friend." Robert looked at him and smiled. Lord Eddard Stark, I would name you the Hand of the King. Come south with me, and I'll teach you how to laugh again. Your armies won me this damned throne, now help me keep it. We were meant to rule together. If Lyanna had lived, we would have been brothers, bound by blood as well as affection. Well, it is not too late. I have a son. You have daughters. My Joff and one of your twins shall join our houses as Lyanna and I might have done. Ned dropped to one knee. Neither offer surprised him. What other reason could Robert have had for coming so far? The Hand of the King was the second most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms. He spoke with the king's voice, commanded the king's armies, drafted the king's laws. At times he even sat upon the Iron Throne to dispense the king's justice when the king was absent, or sick, or otherwise indisposed. Robert was offering him a responsibility as large as the realm itself. It was the last thing in the world he wanted. It was the last thing in the realm he could do. The bloody accords were clear. Forgive me, your grace, but I must refuse the honor of Hand of the King. Ned responded. Robert rolled his eyes good-naturedly. I'm not trying to honor you. I'm trying to get you to do all my work. He exclaimed. Ned shook his head. You misunderstand me, Robert. I cannot accept the position. Robert's eyebrows crinkled and Ned thought he saw a flash of annoyance in his old friend's eyes. And why not? Robert challenged. My duties within the North are too extensive and wide-ranging for me to also take on the duties of the Hand of the King. Nonsense. Robert bellowed. Cregan Stark managed it. Cregan Stark managed it for 6 days, Ned reminded him, and Robert scowled. I would also need to talk to Ash, Ned said, and he saw Robert's gaze tighten. And what of a betrothal? He barked, clearly irritated. Ned winced. Ashura and his father had warned him that something like this was coming years ago. With the agreement that Ned's father had struck at the end of the war, a marriage between the Iron Throne and House Stark was the only way of ensuring that Tywin Lannister's legacy was secure. Ned doubted it would have taken Cersei much to convince Robert of the merits of her father's plan. But Ned would not send his daughters south. His sister had gone south and she had returned in a wooden coffin, her body pale and lifeless. He would not have the same fate bestowed upon his daughters, especially the two that were the mirror images of Lyanna at the same age. No, Ned said evenly. No. Robert asked, and in the torchlight, Ned saw a dangerous glint in his old friend's eye. Robert had never been accustomed to being denied anything. Women, wine and even his throne had not been denied to him, even when it did Robert no good. With all due respect, your grace, I must first talk to my wife. Ashura would not be happy if I organized the betrothal of one of her daughters without hearing from her first. All right then, Robert said after a moment's silence, talk to your wife. But don't leave me waiting too long. I'm an impatient man. With that, Robert turned and stormed his way out of the crypts, leaving Ned alone in the Hall of the Dead. He could feel their eyes watching him, their stone gaze boring through him. They were all listening, he knew. And winter was coming. Winter was always coming. Notes. Next chapter we get Jon's first perspective and the first major divergence from what I originally posted. Chapter 4, Jon I, A Feast for Wolves. Summary. The feast at Winterfell happens. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The feast was in full swing and the room was filled with the buzz of the feast-goers, most of whom were in various states of drunkenness. Jon had kept one eye on Artos the entire night under his father's instruction, yet somehow his cheeks were flushed and his speech was slurred. The guards said that he was the Brandon Stark come again. To be fair though, his wolf pack wasn't in a much better state. Asher Forrester was drunkenly performing a ballad of the time that he had killed a giant snow bear when they had been hunting in the woods near Last Hearth a few years back. He wore the pelt of the bear as a coat even now, and it was the gaudiest coat that Jon had seen any northerner ever wear. For some reason Asher had left the head attached and used it as the beginnings of a sleeve instead. Small Janumber and Brynden Bloodstark were glaring at each other from opposite ends of the table, their fingers cradling the knives that rested on their belts. Jon wasn't that concerned though. He had seen the amount of wine that Brynden had consumed and had witnesses the Smalljans throwing skills in the yard. He doubted either was in much danger. Gendry Waters was having a conversation with Walton White Estok over a roast boar and a jug of fine northern ale. Samwell Tarly and Devan Seaworth were listening in, while next to them, the three Karstark brothers were getting hammered off shots of vodka with Rickon Riverstock. Theon Greyjoy was on his third jug of spiced wine, and had one of the serving girls in his lap. Theon was a good man, and a better friend, but his appetite for women and wine was almost ceaseless. It was nowhere near as much however as the appetite for such things as the appetite of the king. Jon watched even now, from his place at the head of his table as his father tried to turn the king's attentions from the serving girl who was serving his wine. It was an admirable effort, but it was also a futile one. Jon met his father's gaze and gave him a consoling smile. His father smiled back tightly, and Jon could sense the anger radiating off of him. If the serving girl wasn't careful, by morning she could be looking for work again. After a sharp glance from his father, the girl seemed to get the message, and left, leaving Robert alone with his boar and ale. "Your father doesn't look happy tonight," a voice said, interrupting his thoughts. Jon turned to see his uncle standing before him, clad in thick armor, and thicker furs. His beard was long, and the tips of his ears were black. Here was his uncle, the feared Benjen Hardstock, Lord of Hardham and last surviving lord beyond the wall. Here was the man who fought giants, dueled with wildlings and battled with the harsh lands he lived in. "Uncle!" Jon cried in delight as he leapt to his feet. "It has been too long." "It has, Jon," Benjen replied with a grin as he wrapped him in a hug. "It has been far too long." "What are you doing here?" Jon asked. "Last I heard there were whispers of a new king beyond the wall." "Were they false?" Benjen's mouth twisted. "No, Jon," he replied. "They were not false. I have come south to speak with your father and see the king. I have need of troops to defend Hardham." Jon glanced at the king, who was now engaged in a deep conversation with his father. "Then by all means," he said, "do not let me keep you." Benjen chuckled dryly, before making his way up the dais, where he was greeted by Ned and the king enthusiastically. Jon laughed at his uncle, before turning around to observe the hall. Observing was an activity Jon enjoyed. Much could be learned from watching people, and over the years Jon had gotten very good at it. For instance, Jon was able to tell that Jaime Lannister was tenser than any other man in the room, and his eyes kept flicking to the doorways. Jon suspected he was dreading the arrival of Jon's uncle, the legendary Arthur Dayne. Arthur was currently hunting bandits in the Wolf's Wood though, and would not be back until at least tomorrow. As Jon watched, Rhaenys Targaryen, disguised as a serving girl in service to his mother, approached him, and Jaime looked like he had seen a ghost. In a way he had. Jon mused, and the irony and humor of the situation was not lost on him. Jon could also see that his mother and the queen were playing that strange game that his mother's handmaidens played sometimes by trying to insult each other by being overly and insincerely kind. From the laugh that just burst from his mother's lips and the scowl that graced the queen's, Jon would have guessed that his mother had just won. There was Thorin Oakenstock, his short form wrapped in armor, his helm dazzling all with the brilliance of the Arkenstone and Orcrist strapped to his back. Even though he was a dwarf, he was one of the most formidable warriors in the north, having learned to turn his weakness into his strength. He was one of the four guardians of the Wolf Pack, the others being Arthur Dayne, Jory Castle and Davos Seaworth. Near the back of the hall, Tyrion Lannister and the great Jon Umber were engaged in a drinking game of some sort. Jon had no clue how Tyrion was keeping up with Giant Lord, but somehow he was. Jon sighed and returned his attention to his ale and roast cattle, while around him the wolf pack hollered and hooted. "What's with the long face, Stark?" Robb asked from where he had just seated himself at his right side, in the seat that was always reserved for him. "I hate Southerners," Jon replied. "And their arrogance is wearing me thin." "I hear you, brother," Robb replied, and together they cast their eyes to the high table, where the prince dined with their family. His nose seemed to be permanently upturned, and his mouth permanently downturned. "What a prick," Robb muttered, and Jon agreed. "Where have you been?" Jon asked. "I was talking with my great-uncle Brynden. I haven't seen him since we went to the Saltsmoor last year." "What did he have to say?" "Not much," Robb replied, though Jon noticed that his eyes had turned wary. though apparently father has been increasing the numbers of winter wolves stationed along the moor and moving more walks south. Uncle Bryndon reckons that the number of werewolves has doubled ever since John Arryn's death. John grunted in reply. Perhaps we shall be marching south soon. Perhaps. Robb replied, though he has also heard word from the sailors that Viserys Targaryen has begun petitioning the Triarchs of Volantis to support his claim to the Iron Throne. Interesting. John replied, and Robb nodded. War is on its way, it seems. Who knows? Robb said, soon you may be leading the men south. What an adventure that will be for you. John laughed. I'll make sure that when it does happen you can lead the defense of Hardham from the Wilderling hordes. Robb looked at him in mock horror. And what of all the unlucky maidens of the south? He exclaimed. Who will be there to pluck their pretty roses for them? The gods know you won't be. Exactly. John replied with a grin. We will have to send you someplace where the women know how to defend their roses better. Who knows? You might return with a Wilderling beauty on your arm. Robb went to laugh, but his smile was replaced with a scowl at a shadow behind John. John turned to find the king standing behind him, a smile on his face. Your Grace. John greeted as he rose to his feet. Around him, his wolf pack followed likewise. The king's face flushed, though whether it was with embarrassment or anger John could not tell. Sit, sit. He muttered, don't make a scene for me. John obliged, and offered him the seat on his left. Robert sat, and his girth took much of the bench up. John ended up squashed up against Robb, who was simmering in quiet fury. Robert squinted when he saw the auburn-haired youth. Good gods! He breathed, you're Ned's bastard. John's jaw clenched. He didn't like it when people called Robb a bastard. This was the North. Those titles didn't matter here. Snow or Stark, what difference did it make? I am. Robb responded. It was a lie his father's spies had spread years ago, in the aftermath of Ricard's rebellion. Many septons of the Seven had been preaching against Brandon Stark, his father, and had called for the entire execution of the Stark line. To protect him, Robb's uncle had claimed him as his own so that he could claim that whatever had made Brandon turn into a wolf did not infect Robb's blood as well. You've got the look of your mother, don't you? The king asked, and John glared at the king, while Robb smiled consolingly. He has the heart of a Stark, your Grace. John said, his tone ice cold, in the North that's all that matters. Robert looked taken aback by John's tone for a long, tense second, before a smile burst through his bushy beard. You Northerners are loyal to your own, aren't you? We have to be. John replied. It is either that or die when winter comes. Robert frowned as he beheld the serious faces that emerged when John mentioned winter. Gods, you're a grim lot. He muttered as he picked up a discarded ale horn. You're like your father was when he was your age. John's interest was piqued. His father rarely spoke about his time with Robert Baratheon in the Vale. All John knew he had learned from rumors and his mother. After his grandfather's rebellion, his father had seen red every time someone mentioned the king. And for good reason as well, from what John had heard. Apparently the bear of a man who sat before him had called his mother a whore and tried to murder him. Thank you for the compliment, your Grace. John said. Robert took a long swig of the ale from his horn before slamming it back down onto the table. So tell me, he boomed, tell me of this legendary wolf pack Torrhen and Mark were talking up on the journey here. John shrugged. We are raised as brothers. Everything we do together. Yesterday we grew up together. Today we will fight together. And tomorrow we will die together. Around the table, the wolf pack sounded their agreements by banging their cups and horns upon the table. Here, here, came the call up and down the line. The king looked on in admiration, before slamming his own cup upon the table. His act was met with cheers and raucous applause from the wolf pack, though John noticed that Asher looked put out at having his ballad interrupted. Tell me a story, the king roared as the noise died down. Tell me of your life. Shall I tell him of how I got my fine coat? Asher Forrester cried in delight as he leapt to his feet, prepared to launch into another stanza of his ballad. Asher's declaration was met with a round of jeering and he was pelted with scraps of food. John rolled his eyes at Robb good-naturedly. What's this, the king asked, interest flashing across his features. Don't ask. John replied. Or if you really want to, ask at a time that none of us are present. Not only did we have the misfortune to be there when it happened, we have since had to put up with hearing different versions of it 100 times. Robert grunted and looked around at the joking, laughing group of boys and sighed wistfully. I remember when I was living like this. Of course my group of friends wasn't as large as yours and we were living in the Uri. It was me, your father, Denise and Elberatarin and a few other boys. Robert drank from his cup and sadness and melancholy flashed across his features. His gaze was unseeing, staring off into a place only he could see. Those were the best days of my life, he admitted. The days were filled with adventure, the nights were filled with laughter. John grinned at the description. That sounds a fair bit like my life at the moment. It's a good way to live, Robert responded. He looked around, and his expression changed as he looked at his own son. His lips curled into something that was reminiscent of a sneer, and John watched in interest. If only my son lived like this as well, Robert continued. Maybe that would fix some of his problems. Problems? John asked. Does the boy trouble you? Something is wrong with him, the king admitted, and John wondered how much he had had to drink. His mother has sheltered him too much. There is a sickness in him. Some days I wonder how I ever produced him. John watched the king warily, before glancing back at the boy. The king took another swig of his ale, before burping loudly. I say, he exclaimed after a moment of thought. I've had an idea. Do you reckon my son could foster with you for a little while? John shook his head apologetically. I'm sorry, Your Grace, but no, I don't think your son would do too well serving with the wolf pack. Why not? Robert asked, and John wondered if he should continue. After a moment of deliberation, he decided he would. With all due respect, Your Grace, our life is not easy. It's a life I don't think your son would be able to transition into very easily. We have no servants in the wolf fort. We have no cooks. We have no maids. We have no guards. Everything we want and need must be done by ourselves. And if my father comes to the castle and thinks we have not kept proper care of it, or we fail the random attacks by my father's men, we are thrown out of the castle for a moon and must live in the wolf's wood. It's not a life for the faint of heart. Every boy here has been living that way since they were 6 years of age. I could command you to, Robert responded, though his voice sounded despondent. You could, John replied, but I cannot promise that any of my brothers would accept your command. Robert looked pained. Would you at least meet with him and consider it? John hesitated, and the king saw it as indecision. Please, he said. I'm not asking you as a king. I'm asking you as a father, who worries for his son. John looked over at the prince, who continued to sneer at those around him. Though his head told him no, his heart went out to the father that sat beside him and he nodded. I will talk to him, though I make no promises that I will allow him to stay. Robert's smile beamed, and for a second John saw the handsome, charismatic man that had earned the moniker of the Demon of the Trident, but then he was replaced with the drunken, slovenly king that took up the bench space next to him. Joff, Robert called, and he waved over the prince when he looked up. Joffrey looked uncertain for a moment, and John wondered how many times Robert had directly spoken to Prince Joffrey. From the look on Joffrey's face, John was guessing he would be able to count the times on one hand. The sneer disappeared from Joffrey's face, and he made his way from his seat to where they sat. Father, he greeted Robert. Come, come, Robert said impatiently. Have a seat. Robert turned to Robb. Move, boy, he snapped. Make way for your prince. John stiffened in his seat, and glared at the fat king. Do not move, he snapped, when Robb went to leave. Robb paused and watched the confrontation between the king and the heir to Winterfell nervously. John turned to the prince. Your father wants you to join my wolf pack, he said, and here is your first lesson, Joffrey. The prince's gaze briefly flicked to his father, before he returned it to John. He smirked. John glared at the arrogant boy before continuing. Your titles mean nothing here. No one's do, except my father's and mine. You answer to me and I answer to my father. This king has no authority over this table or those who sit here. Robert's face swelled in anger and a vein throbbed in the side of his head. Joffrey sneered at Jon and barked in amusement. I am the prince, he exclaimed. If I wanted to I could order your execution upon this very day. Jon shot to his feet, and his hand leapt to the hilt of his sword. You are more than welcome to try, Jon replied, his voice low and his eyes flashing dangerously. However, this is the north. Our way is the old way. If you want my head, you must take it yourself. I will see you in the training yard tomorrow at first light. With that, Jon spat at the prince's feet and stepped over the bench, before turning his back and storming out of the hall, his wolf pack following in his wake. Behind him the king returned to his seat by Lord Stark, while the prince simmered in fury and embarrassment. Notes. Next up is Tyrion's first chapter. Chapter 5, Tyrion I, The Wolven Storm. Summary. Joffrey fights Jon. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Chapter 5. Tyrion I. Tyrion was up before the sun had even risen. It was not something he did often, and something he didn't think he had ever done the morning after a feast that had gone into the latest hours of the night. His head pounded from the amount of alcohol he had consumed, but he wouldn't miss what was coming for the world. Soon his haughty nephew would face Jon Stark in the training yard. Tyrion didn't think he had been this excited since the day he had awoken to find a cup of the finest Arbor gold in his hand and a very pretty whore with her lips wrapped around his cock. That had been the morning when he had decided on the way he wanted to die. Tyrion left his room as the sun first began to peek over the horizon and made his way down to the stables where one of his men, Jack, had organized a horse for him to ride. The training yard the wolf pack of Winterfell used was located in the Wolf Fort, the home of all the young heirs of the North. Last night, those boys had been an impressive group of young warriors. It was clear they were all utterly loyal and devoted to each other, and would have lain down their lives for one another if asked. Well, that was with the exception of Small Jon Umber and Brynden Bloodstark. Those two had been glaring daggers at each other the entire night, and Tyrion was surprised they hadn't come to blows. When he reached the stables, he was greeted by a surly prince, and an equally surly brother. Behind them stood the Hound, his eyes scanning every living being that walked past with such enmity that he caused one young girl to burst into tears. "Good morning," Tyrion greeted cheerily. "What a beautiful morning this is turning out to be." The Hound grunted in response, while Joffrey glared at him. "What are you doing here?" he asked, looking at Tyrion as if he was as welcome here as a wet shit. "Oh sweetest nephew," Tyrion said as he reached up and rubbed his cheek affectionately, "I've come to see you spar with young Lord Jon." Joffrey slapped his hand away and threw one last poisonous glare, before hauling himself onto his horse and kicking its sides. "Come dog," he called as he trotted past the Hound, "I have a wolf pelt to collect." The stables and courtyard rang with Joffrey's laughter as he lauded his own joke. Tyrion refrained from rolling his eyes and climbed aboard his own horse. The Hound trotted past, and sat just behind the prince. Tyrion and Jaime trotted after them, their horses making their way out of Winterfell and into the Winter City proper. Tyrion turned to his brother, who looked as though he hadn't slept for a week. His cheeks were sunken, and his hands trembled like leaves in the wind. His skin was as pale as the snow that fell from the sky, and his eyes were the eyes of a madman, darting left and right and haunted. "Brother?" Tyrion asked. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Jaime replied lowly. "I'm just nervous." "Nervous?" Tyrion asked. "Nervous about what?" "About seeing him again." There was no need to ask who he was. There was only one man in the entire world that Jaime cared enough about to leave him nervous. Arthur Dayne. The Sword of the Morning, and the knight Jaime squired for. Tyrion knew that Jaime had idolized, and in many ways still did, the famed knight. "What if he hates me for what I did?" Jaime asked. "What if he curses me for killing Aerys? What if he scorns me for staying in the Kingsguard, even after Robert took the throne? What if?" "So many what ifs," Tyrion interrupted. "What if the sky fell on our head? What if the whores all disappeared? What if the others returned? But what if he hates me? Jaime asked. I don't know if I could bear it. My whole life he is who I've looked up to, and who I have always strived to be. Now today, I find out if he still sees me as the boy who squired for him, or the man that killed the king he had sworn to protect. Tyrion looked at his brother sadly. It was strange seeing Jaime like this. For years he had worn his arrogance as an armor, and a possibility of meeting one man had stripped all that arrogance away. Left behind was the shell of a traumatized and insecure man, who struggled with the choices of the past. It doesn't matter what he sees you as, Tyrion said. Does it change the past? Does it change what you have done? Does it change anything? You are still a Lannister of Casterly Rock and a Knight of the Kingsguard. You are still my brother. We are both lions. By what right does the sheep judge the lion? But. No. Tyrion said firmly. There is no buts. What did Rickard Stark tell you? Jaime looked away, his eyes unseeing. Tyrion knew of the massive amount of respect Jaime had for the Burnt Lord, a respect that Rickard Stark had earned on the day his forces had taken King's Landing. He said I was the truest knight of the Kingsguard. And that I had more honor than any of the other Kingsguard. He said to wear what I have done with pride. Then wear it with pride. Tyrion said. Make it your armor and don't let anyone know how much it hurts you, especially not him. Jaime smiled at him weakly. That sounds like something father would say. Hear me roar. Tyrion replied dryly. Hear me roar. Jaime affirmed. They rode the rest of the way in silence and Tyrion took the opportunity to admire the city around him. The Winter City truly was one of the most beautiful and unique cities in the world. On the side of the street stood a great brown bear, its vital regions covered by light steel plate, while upon its head sat a monstrous war helm. In the sky eagles flitted to and fro, and occasionally dived into the city to retrieve or accost someone. The buildings themselves were made out of oak and stone, and sturdily built. The grey stone and white snow caused the entire city to have a wintry feel about it, and when the sun peeked through the clouds the entire city sparkled. The banners of House Stark hung from every street sign and well, letting all know of who owned this great domain. The people were busy, and the children were happy while the shops were filled with food and the houses with people. And perhaps most amazingly of all, the air smelt enchanting, a strange mix of pine needles and snow with the tiniest hint of smoke. They soon came to the Wolf Fort and Tyrion noted with interest that the guards at the gates were some of the boys who had been present at the feast last night. Neither could have been older than 16, yet both were as ramrod straight and as attentive as that of a man who had been a guard for 40 years. Their gilded bronze spears and armor glinted in the early morning light, and when their party went to cross the boys moved in unison to block their way. Halt! One said. Who goes there? Joffrey, Gods bless his arrogant soul, sneered at them, before turning to the Hound. Get these fools out of my way. The Hound nodded, and swung from his horse before placing on his dog's head helm and drawing his great sword. To the boys' credit, neither flinched nor shirked in their duty. I'll give you one chance to move out of our way. The Hound growled, but the boys shook their heads. Tell us of who you are and we will arrange to have a guard escort you. Do you know who I am? Joffrey exclaimed in disbelief. The boys glanced at each other. Someone who thinks he's above the laws of this city. The one on the left replied. I am above the laws of this land. Joffrey replied angrily. Move them at once, dog. I have a meeting to make and I don't want to be late. It's all right. A voice called, and from within the fort Robb Snow strode out. These men are expected. Hurry on. The one on the left, Harry on, squinted at them suspiciously, before turning to Robb. If you say so. He replied, before bringing up his spear and stepping aside. His fellow guard did the same, and Robb strode out to greet them. I apologize most profusely to all of you. Robb Snow said, but my guards take their duties very seriously. If you had have been sent here by my father we would have been spending the next month in the Wolf's Wood. Tyrion nodded in acceptance. He had overheard Jon Stark telling the King of Life in the Wolf Fort last night, but the others didn't care. Joffrey had already ridden on, and the Hound, the ever-loyal dog, was again following him. No offense was taken. Tyrion replied for all of them as they moved on towards the training yard. Already Tyrion could hear the clash of steel on steel and the shouts and grunts of fighting men. The courtyard was filled with the northern boys they called the Wolf Pack, some 150 strong. Most of them Tyrion had no clue of their identity, but a few stood out. Jon Stark, their leader, and Robb Snow were the ones Tyrion knew of best, but he also saw the sigils of houses Umber, Hornwood and Karstark as well as all the different variations of the Stark direwolf, from grey ones that ran on a blood-red field, to grey heads that graced a sea-blue field. It was the men in the center of the courtyard though that drew Tyrion's attention. Arthur Dayne stood next to Thorin Oakenstark and watched as Jon Stark dueled a boy in a bull-headed helm. Tyrion racked his brains for a northern house that took a bull for its sigil, yet none sprung to mind. Neither of them held anything back, and Tyrion almost burst out into laughter at the look upon Joffrey's face. These were two skilled fighters. Jon Stark fought with a blunted practice blade, while the boy in the bull-headed helm fought with a monstrous warhammer that rivaled even King Robert's. "Keep your shield up, Gendry," Arthur Dayne called as Jon Stark managed to slip past the boy. "Gendry's guard." Gendry stepped back from Jon's strike before swinging his hammer at Jon's own shield. Jon Stark tried to twist away, and the hammer caught him square in his padded gamison. To Tyrion's amazement, Jon Stark was literally thrown backwards from the force of the blow. He was lifted off his feet and sailed through the air for a good few feet, before crashing back down to the ground. Tyrion stared at Gendry in bewilderment. To throw a man into the air with a swing of his hammer was a feat of strength that was frankly, almost unheard of. Robert had boasted of doing it, but Tyrion had never met a man to corroborate these tales, and indeed Sir Barristan had flat out denied that he had done it at the Trident with one of the Diari brothers. Gendry grunted in satisfaction while Arthur Dayne made his way over to his nephew and hauled him to his feet. "Stupid boy," he muttered at Jon. "What were you thinking?" He slapped him lightly across the back of the head. "Don't ever let me catch you doing that again." Jon Stark nodded in agreement and reached up and removed his helm. His hair was soaked with sweat and his cheeks were flushed. Across the yard, Gendry did likewise and Tyrion's heart stopped in his chest. He felt the blood rush from his face, and suddenly he understood where this boy's skill with a warhammer and legendary strength came from. There was no doubting who he was. With those blue eyes and that black hair he was a dead ringer for Robert Baratheon 20 years ago. Not that Tyrion had seen him. But he could imagine. A glance sideways confirmed it. Jaime knew who it was too. Father was going to be furious when he found out and Cersei would be apoplectic. By the grace of the Seven, Joffrey did not have the sense to put two and two together and was oblivious to the identity of the man who stood 10 meters in front of him. Instead he stepped forward into the yard, announcing their presence for the entire wolf pack to see and hear. Jon Stark stepped away from his uncle, his practice sword resting at his side. "Prince Joffrey," he greeted, but tellingly he did not bow, or even dip his head. This action, however, did not go unnoticed by Joffrey. He always was quick to sense a slight. "It is customary to bow before your prince." Jon Stark smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were still pits of dark grey ice, burning through Joffrey. Around him the wolf pack of Winterfell whispered amongst one another and glared daggers at the prince. "It is customary to bow before your king," Jon replied. "Not your prince. At least in the north, that is. In the north a man must earn the right to be bowed to." Joffrey looked around him at the faces that glared at him, before stepping forth into the ring. "Well then," he said. "If it takes a beating to make you bend the knee, then so be it." Tyrion didn't know whether to laud Joffrey for his courage or laugh at him for his stupidity. Jon gestured at Gendry and he left the ring, and took his place by the other boys of the pack. "Well then," Jon replied. "Shall we begin?" Joffrey nodded his assent and Thorin Oakenstark appeared at his side carrying a padded gamison and blunted sword. Joffrey looked down at the dwarf lord in disgust. "A dwarf?" he sneered. "Is this an insult or just a bad joke?" Tyrion's eyes widened in horror. For years all he wanted to do was meet with Thorin Oakenstark. From a young age, Tyrion had idolized House Oakenstark, particularly the tales he had heard of Thorin. They said he was a warrior without peer, one who hadn't let his diminutive size hinder his ability to wield his family's ancestral Valyrian steel blade, or Krist. Tyrion had once thought he could become the next Thorin Oakenstark, until the day his father had flatly refused to allow the Master of Arms of Casterly Rock to teach him how to wield a sword. Tyrion's heart had been shattered that day. He could still remember his father's scathing rebuke of Tyrion's dreams to wield a sword. It almost hurt as much as it had to lose Tisha. And now, because of one foolish boy and his loud mouth, Tyrion's chance at meeting his idol may have just gone with the wind. Tyrion resisted the urge to march into the ring and slapped the arrogant Whoreson across his mouth. Hopefully he would knock some sense into Joffrey's brain, but he doubted it. It seemed he had inherited his mother's penchant for stupidity and cruelty. Jon Stark looked at the prince coolly, before turning to his uncle. "Go and assist the prince." Arthur Dayne looked as though he had just been asked to kill a newborn babe. A battle of wills erupted between uncle and nephew, but in the end the heir to Winterfell won and Arthur Dayne was striding across to Joffrey with a look of such intense loathing and hatred on his face, that Tyrion felt slightly disconcerted. Arthur Dayne assisted Joffrey in readying himself for the spar, though he was none too gentle in the process. Thorin Oakenstar meanwhile, went and helped Jon Stark. Soon both were ready, and stepped forward, directly across from each other. Jon nodded once at Joffrey before slamming down the visor of his helm, and hefting his sword and shield. Joffrey did likewise, though his sword wavered in the air. It was clear that this was not an activity that Joffrey was accustomed to. "Begin." Arthur Dayne barked, and almost immediately Jon Stark went on the offensive. He swung his practice sword in an overhead arc towards Joffrey's head. Through sheer dumb luck, Joffrey somehow managed to catch the blow upon his blade. Then Joffrey swung his own blade, but Jon knocked it aside almost contemptuously, before launching back, and driving Joffrey across the yard with a series of sweeps, swings and shoves. Jon Stark pushed Joffrey right to the wall of men that surrounded them before deciding to finish it. With an elaborate twist of his blade, Joffrey's was wrenched from his grasp and landed a few feet away. But Jon Stark wasn't finished. Next he slipped his own blade past Joffrey's shield, before tripping him with one of his feet, before catching him with his arms. When all the movement was said and done, Joffrey found himself on one knee before the heir of Winterfell. For a long, tense second Jon stared at the young prince before finally releasing him and stepping back. Joffrey's face flushed as he realized the position he was in. He sprung to his feet. "This is a game for children," he said. "Let us fight like real men. Let us fight with live steel." Jon Stark looked amused before glancing at Arthur Dayne. Arthur Dayne was glaring upon Prince Joffrey with a look of hate so intense it was slightly disturbing. He nodded once and Jon Stark drew his own blade. Tyrion gasped in shock and awe of the blade that he wielded. It was star steel, the same material that Arthur Dayne's Dawn was forged of. It was clearly not Dawn though, as Dawn was currently strapped to Arthur Dayne's side. Jon Stark's blade was plain, but it was beautiful. The handle of the blade was wrapped in white leather, while the crossguard and pommel were composed of bronze-coated steel. The scabbard was comprised of weirwood and white leather while a bronze filigree capped the top and bottom. "Behold," Robb Snow called as he stirred from where he lounged against a wall, "Snowfall, the blade of Winterfell, the blade of the heir." All Tyrion could think about was how jealous their father was going to be when he found out that the Starks had another star steel blade in their possession. Their father had complained constantly about the blade of Roderick Walton, though Tyrion was yet to meet this mysterious and interesting figure, or see the blade that he had heard so much of. Joffrey blanched a bit, and stepped back, but Jon Stark was upon him. Almost lazily, he swung his blade up, past Joffrey's guard and across his cheek. The cut was shallow, but it bled well. It would scar one day, no doubt. The whole exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. Joffrey stumbled away and dropped his sword at his feet, before clutching his cheek tenderly. "You cut me!" he exclaimed. "You asked for live steel." Jon Stark replied. "I gave you live steel. If you were not prepared to be cut," Boy Arthur Dayne spat, "you should not have entered the ring." Joffrey drew himself up to his full height. "I am the Crown Prince," he cried as he stamped his foot. "You can't talk to me like that." Arthur just glared at the boy before sneering and turning his back on him. To Tyrion's horror, Jaime stepped forward. I am prepared to be cut. Jaime called after Arthur Dane. I will fight you, Sir Arthur. No, Arthur Dane replied without turning around. Please, Arthur. Jaime exclaimed as he stepped forward and drew his sword. For old time's sake. As a nod to the days when I was just squire. The master against the apprentice. Not a day goes by that I don't curse myself for taking you on as my squire. Arthur said with passion in his voice, and Jaime stepped back, the shock evident on his face. Arthur glared at Tyrion's brother, before spitting at his feet. Jaime paled and stepped back. He swallowed audibly, before his arrogance came rushing back, and he turned to Jon Stark. What of you, Lord Jon? Would you like to spar? No, Arthur called out. You will not spar in this courtyard. I will not have your blade profaning the place where I teach my nephews how to swing their swords. Jaime nodded stiffly, before turning and marching away, Joffrey trotting after him, and the Hound trotting after him. All such loyal dogs. Tyrion went to follow, but he felt a hand upon his arm. He looked up into the cool, grey gaze of Jon Stark, who had Thorin Oakenstark standing next to him. Lord Tyrion. Jon greeted, as I promised you at the feast last night, here is Lord Thorin Oakenstark. Tyrion glanced the man up and down, and he was impressed with what he saw. A plaited black beard hung down his face, and his blue eyes sparkled with life. He was a little bit taller than Tyrion, though not by much. The famed blade Orcrist hung on his back, while he was wrapped in leather and chainmail armor. On his head rested the helm that was set with the brilliant Arkenstone, the crown jewel, so to speak, of the Oakenshield mines. Lord Tyrion. Thorin Oakenshield greeted. It is a pleasure to meet another dwarf lord like me. Tyrion's mind raced as he thought of the opportunities that this friendship could bring. A Dwarven warrior and a dwarven scholar. Together they would be a formidable team. And both had more money than they knew what to do with. Just like Tyrion had more ideas than he knew what to do with. Notes. Next chapter is Jaime. Please leave a comment and tell me what you think. Chapter 6, Jaime I, White Wings, White Eyes. Summary. Jaime storms off. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Jaime stormed away from the courtyard, his heart thundering in his chest. To his despair, he could feel tears pooling in the sides of his eyes. What had he become to feel like this? Since when had the opinion of one man mattered so much? Since when had the lion cared for the opinions of sheep? Behind him Joffrey and the Hound wandered off somewhere else, and Jaime's feet led him, his mind unaware of where he was going. To his horror, his feet led him straight to the Black Bat. Sir Oswell went. He bumped into him unawares, and only realizing who he had hit when he lifted his gaze and saw the bat helm that sat upon his old sworn brother's head. Sir Jaime. Oswell went greeted calmly. Sir Oswell. Jaime replied. Not anymore. Oswell went replied with a bitter smile. What do you mean? Jaime asked, confused. I'm no sir anymore. The High Septon stripped Arthur and I of our knightly oaths. He did? Jaime asked, surprised. He hadn't heard that news. The last he had seen or heard of either of them was when they had left King's Landing in Lord Stark's retinue 16 years ago. When? Oswell went shrugged. Got the letter a few years ago. To be honest, Arthur doesn't care that much. He's almost a northerner nowadays. Yes. Jaime replied, the thoughts of Arthur Dane bitter on his mind. I seemed to notice he hates me as much as all these other northerners. Oswell went shrugged. If it makes you feel any better, I hate you too, and I'm not almost a northerner. I'm still a southerner. Jaime's lip curled. Why? He asked. Why do you and Arthur hate me for killing the Mad King? Oswell went smirked at him, and Jaime resisted the urge to wipe the smirk from his face with the sword that rested at his side. You think we hate you for killing the Mad King? What else have I done to deserve your loathing? Jaime asked. Arthur and I don't hate you for killing the Mad King. Arthur has said himself that if he was in your position he would have killed Aerys too. So would have I. I think I would have enjoyed it too. So why do you hate me then? Tell me, Sir Jaime, Oswell went said. While you were killing Aerys, what was happening to Elia Martell and her children? Who had Rhaegar left to protect them? Me. Sir Jaime whispered. You! Oswell Went exclaimed as he stabbed Jaime with the point of his finger. You were left to protect them and instead they ended up dead. We don't hate you for failing to fulfill your duties to Aes. We hate you for failing to fulfill your oaths to Elia Martell and her children. We hate you even more for the traitor's name that you bear. With a last look of disgust, Oswell Went turned around and left Jaime alone with his thoughts. Jaime stormed into his sister's chambers in a rage. Where was Jaime on the day that Elia was killed? Where the fuck had Arthur been? Almost immediately his sister emerged from behind the partition and noted the troubled look in his gaze. What's wrong? She asked as she reached for the wine. Arthur Dane and Oswell Went. Jaime spat. Jaime paced back and forth upon the fur-covered floor. Don't worry about them. Cersei said as she came closer, her dress slipping, revealing her breasts. Worry about me? She said as she pushed him down into a chair. She claimed his lips with hers, and his hands fumbled at her chest and back as he tried to remove her dress. Their dance took them away from the chair and across to Cersei's feather bed. They tumbled down into its softness, both as naked as newborns. Cersei flipped him over so that she was on top, and that was when he first saw the white raven that sat in the rafters, peering down at them. Fuck! Jaime cried as he shoved Cersei off him roughly. She tumbled onto the stone floor with a small scream and Jaime scrambled to wrap the furs around himself. What the fuck was that for? Cersei asked as she clambered to her feet and glared daggers at him. Pass me my sword. Jaime cried as he pulled his breeches on. Quick! Why? Cersei asked and Jaime rushed past her to seize his own sword. Without responding he ran after the white raven, who flitted from rafter to rafter in an attempt to get away the bite of Jaime's sword. Cersei screamed when she saw it, knowing what it meant, who it heralded. Only the Starks had white ravens. Briefly Jaime wondered whose raven this one was. As if in answer, the bird soared past Cersei and out the window. Jaime rushed across to follow it, and saw a lone figure waiting in the courtyard below. The bird alighted on the figure's shoulder and Jaime rushed to the doorway, determined to kill whoever it was before they could put any of his blood in danger. In his haste he had forgotten to put on his clothes and only wore breeches. He rushed down the steps, his naked blade gleaming in the sun. He emerged from the tower and saw the figure sitting down on a log, waiting for him it seemed. Jaime rushed over and was surprised to see the youngest Stark, Alaric, sitting in front of him, calmly preening the white raven's feathers. Jaime paused as he reached him, and glanced around. No one was near. He could kill him and no one would be any the wiser. Who would know? Alaric. Someone called and Jaime nearly jumped out of his skin. Sir Jaime. The same voice asked and Jaime turned to see Ashura Dane staring at him in bewilderment. What are you doing? Two of them. No one was near. He could kill them both and no one would be any the wiser. Who would know? Ashura. Eddard Stark asked as he emerged from around the corner. He balked when he noticed Jaime's naked torso. What is Sir Jaime doing? Just leaving. Jaime replied as he leveled one last glare at the child. The child smirked at him before skipping over to its mother, and tugging on her hand. She leant down and he whispered in Ashura Dane's ear. She listened to the small boy intently, before a look of bemusement flitted across her features. Jaime's heart stopped in his chest. He looked at Eddard Stark and wondered how he would go in a fight with him. He noted the length of ice that sat strapped to Ned Stark's back. This was the man who had beaten Randil Tarly at the God's Eye and then captured Rhaegar. A formidable warrior to be sure. Was he better than Jaime? There was only one way to find out. Jaime breathed in and prepared to fight. I'm so sorry. Ashura said to Jaime as she shook her head at Alaric, before extracting something from his grasp. It was his ring, the one his father had given him. She held it out for him to take and Jaime stared at the boy in shock. What had he told his mother? Alaric should never have taken this. Ashura explained. His raven though has taken a likeliness to shiny things. I fear your ring is just the latest in a long line of victims. Jaime paused and looked at the boy, who smirked up at him. He patted the head of the raven on his shoulder, before making a smooching face at Jaime. Jaime reached out and took the ring, all while glaring at the 6-year-old. Then he turned around and stormed away, furious at the boy who had found them out. Hopefully he didn't realize what he had seen until Jamie had a chance to kill him. Notes. Next chapter is Ned. Please leave me a comment and tell me what you think. Chapter 7, Ned 2, The Coming and Going of Kings. Summary. Robert leaves Winterfell. Notes. Leave a comment and tell me what you think. I'm pretty certain we have now passed the point where I left off in what I originally wrote, so tell me what you think of the new developments. Chapter text. Eddard Stark walked through the halls of his home towards the chambers where the King of the Seven Kingdoms had spent the last month of his life. It had been painful and awkward to be sure, and everyone seemed to be aware of the awkwardness except for the king himself, who was either blissfully ignorant or roaring drunk. Truth be told, Ned had once been as blind as Robert. It was only in the later years of his life, under his wife's careful tutelage, that he learned to read the people that hid behind the masks. Ashura had learned in the Viper's Nest of King's Landing itself, when Aerys yet sat on the throne and Rhaegar was still a man. Ned approached the door to the king's chambers now, and found his old friend guarding it. Mark Ryswell, the White Knight of the North, glanced his way as he approached, but he was otherwise as still as a statue. Ned slipped past him, and Mark didn't respond. Ned knew where Mark's true loyalties lay, and it wasn't with Robert. It saddened him to have to stoop to such levels, especially against the man he had once considered a brother, but it was the reality of the situation he faced. In his role as Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North and Watcher of the White Wolf, he had no room for sentimentality. Especially as the Watcher of the White Wolf. The Starks had been preparing for the arrival of the White Wolf for 300 years in just a few moons. Ned would not be the first of his kin to fail in their ancient and sacred oaths. As he entered the room, the first thing he noticed was the smell. It hung in the air like a perfume, a stench of booze, sweat and sex. From within he heard the sounds of flesh slapping flesh, and he wondered what he had walked into. Ned had seen worse though. Ned had been present at the massacre of God's Eye, when the waters were stained red with the blood of the slain. When the corpses of the Reachmen were feasted upon by wild and waged wolves alike. When the stench of death hung in the air so thickly, that a man could scarcely breathe. "Robert," Ned said calmly as he walked into the room. "We need to talk." "Ned," Robert cried, when he noticed his presence. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Ned repeated. "Now. And alone." A quick, cool glance and the whore got the message. She slid off the fur-laden bed and slipped into her silken dress. Within seconds she was gone, leaving the king unsatisfied upon the bed. But she knew what the king did not. This was the domain of the wolves of Winterfell. Southern kings held no sway here. "What about?" Robert asked as he swung from the bed and swung on a heavy bear fur cloak. "I have come to a decision." "Excellent!" Robert exclaimed. "And?" "No, Your Grace." "No?" Robert asked. "No," Ned affirmed. "I will not be coming south with you." "And why not?" Robert asked, his voice low and dangerous. Ned felt a tinge of fear run through him. The last time he had heard Robert speak like that was the day before he had charged alone down the banks of the Trident to fight Rhaegar and his entourage in one-on-one combat. Robert may have been fat, drunk and a whoremonger, but there was still remnants of the warrior he once was hidden away in there somewhere. "I cannot, my king. I have far too many duties in the north." "No!" Robert roared, and his fury showed through. "No! I travel all this way from King's Landing to offer you the most powerful position in the realm and a betrothal with the Crown Prince, and you doubly insult me by saying no to both. I apologize most profusely." "I don't want your fucking apologies," Robert yelled. "I want you to be Hand of the King." "I can't manage it, Robert," Ned beseeched, trying to calm the furious man down. "I am Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell. The North is as prosperous as the South. How do you expect me to manage both?" "Cregan Stark managed it for Aegon the Dragonborn," Robert retorted. "Cregan Stark served Aegon the Oathbreaker for 6 days," Ned replied. In the north the memory of why Cregan had been given those 6 days still rankled. And it was why the man they called Dragonspan in the south was known as Oathbreaker in the north. That's still 6 more days than you are giving me. Ned stayed silent, unsure of how to continue. Stupid fool, Robert muttered. What could I expect of the man who broke his oaths to house Tully? Of course he would break it for his king as well. Ned clenched his jaw. I warn you now, Robert, if you value our relationship in any way you will stop this conversation right now. No. Robert roared. I came here for a hand and a betrothal and I leave with neither. 16 years ago your father robbed me blind. In the South I'm still mocked for that fucking treaty. I won't be robbed by a Stark ever again, give me you or one of your daughters. Until such a time I'm not leaving the North. As if to prove his point, Robert sat down heavily upon the oaken seat that sat next to the fireplace. Ned stared at him for a long time, before turning to the window. Outside the summer snows were falling, while in the courtyard Arya and Deanna were having a snowball fight with Artos. Arya spun around, and just for a fleeting second, the light hit her the right way and he saw Lyanna again. He saw her laughing as Brandon pelted her with snowballs. He saw her laughing as she rode along the King's Road towards the tourney of Harrenhal. He saw her crying as Roriger sung his sad songs. He saw her dying upon a bed of blood, pain in her features and sorrow in her eyes. It was then he knew. He would never willingly send any of his children south ever. The only time a Stark of Winterfell would be going south would be at the head of an army 140,000 strong with a white wolf running before them. Ned had broken the bloody accords enough for one lifetime. He had no wish to break them again. But he had a king that left him no choice. What was he to do? Sacrifice his honor for his children or his children for his honor? Please Ned, Robert begged, his voice softer than Ned had heard it in a long time. I have need of you down south. I don't know what I'm doing. The realm has gone to shit, Ned. I need you. I'm not asking you as your king, I'm asking you as the brothers we once were. In the end the decision was easy. Ned would have given anything for his children, even his life if the gods demanded it of him. 6 days. 6 days? Robert asked. Cregan gave the Oathbreaker 6 days. That is how many days I will give you. I want you for more than that, Ned. Well, that is all you're getting. Be content with 6 or have none. Robert looked torn. There are conditions as well. Ned continued. Conditions? Robert asked, what conditions? You will leave tomorrow at first light. Tomorrow? Robert exclaimed. Whatever for? You will prepare the realm for my coming. I have no intention of staying in the south for any longer than I need to. What do you need me to prepare? Tonight you will go and visit with Maester Lewin. You will send a raven to every Lord Paramount, summoning them to King's Landing. I want Tywin Lannister, Mace Tyrell, Balon Greyjoy and Lysa are in there in person. The rest of them can send representatives. They won't like that. Then command them to as the king they have sworn fealty to. Tell them that any who does not come will be stripped of all their lands and titles. That should bring most of them running. Lysa and Balon won't come for anything. The Iron Islands have been simmering on the brink of war ever since the end of your father's rebellion. That was something that Ned knew well. He still shuddered to think of the deal he had made with Balon to keep them from rebelling. It still haunted his waking hours. Leave Lysa and Balon to me. I warn you, Ned, she's gone mad since her husband died. From what Varys said, she's holed herself up in the Eyrie and refuses to come down for anything. You might find, Robert, that the right word in the right places can get you anything. Robert shrugged and poured himself a cup of ale. I also want your whole small council present when I arrive. Including Stannis. Robert shook his head. Impossible. Stannis has done the same as Lysa and run off to his island fortress. He's become frightened of shadows. Good riddance, I say. Ned found it hard to imagine what could frighten Stannis Baratheon, who had once held Storm's End through a year of siege, surviving on rats and boot leather while the Lords Tyrell and Redwyne sat outside with their hosts, banqueting in sight of his walls. He will come regardless of how scared he is of the shadows. As his king you will order it of him. Even if you have to go to Dragonstone yourself. I want him there. Get him there. Am I clear? Robert nodded. I will do my best. No, Ned replied. You will do better. If I get down to King's Landing and even one of the people I've asked for isn't there, I will turn around and march straight back to Winterfell without even bothering to ask why. Is there anything else? Robert asked. Yes. Ned replied. When I am Hand of the King, my word is law, Robert. Not even yours will be able to overrule me. I don't want to have to worry about you putting the realm back to shit once I've come back to Winterfell. Robert shrugged. If Jon was still alive, he could tell you that I don't care either way. As long as you leave me my horse and my wine, I'll be fine. I'm not though. You're not. No, Ned said. If you want me to be your hand, you won't touch wine or horse from this day forth. Try sleeping with your wife for once. Robert snorted. You serious? He scoffed. I've tried. The ways she guards her cunt, you would think all the gold of Casterly Rock is hidden there. Try regardless. If she say no, go and come back the next day. Persist until she says yes. You need more children, Robert. You can't build a dynasty off 2 sons and 1 daughter. The Targaryens did it with 1 son and 2 daughters. Robert replied. And the Targaryens are gone. They were here for not even 300 years. To House Stark the dragons were no more than dust upon the wind. Unless you want your crown to suffer the same fate, you will have more children. I will try. Robert conceded. Good. Ned said, before sighing. Gods, Robert, where did it all go wrong? When we left the Vale. Robert replied. No, Ned disagreed. It was before that. Robert paused, and his eyes filled with grief. When the smiles died. Ned agreed. When the smiles died. Remember, Robert? First light tomorrow. Robert grunted and Ned walked to the door. He was almost through it when he was stopped. Ned. Robert said, his voice filled with remembered grief. What of the betrothal? No, Ned said firmly. On that there is no negotiation. Please. For the love I bore your sister. Give me this one thing. Ned sighed. No, he finally replied. I will have nothing to do with that child. Give me something, goddammit, Ned. I can't go south until you have given me something. If the other lords knew how much you have defied me, the last semblances of my authority would be gone. I can't send any of my children south, Robert. Surely you would understand why. I get it, Ned, but that doesn't mean you can't leave one of yours. Ned interrupted. Just don't leave Joffrey. True to his word, Robert left at first light the next day. The servants had been rushing around into the latest hours of last night and finalizing things even now. It hadn't been fair of Ned to demand them to leave with such short notice, but then again it hadn't been fair of Robert to demand for Ned to be his Hand of the King. Ned rode beside Robert as they passed through the Winter City. The last promise that Robert had managed to extract of him was that he would escort the king to the city's limits. The ride through the city was largely uneventful. In the last month, the residents of the city had largely become accustomed to the royal retinue's visit. It had very quickly lost its appeal, and now only the youngest children came out to watch them ride past. They passed through, and before Ned knew it they came to the city gates. He turned to Robert, who had stopped. Well, I guess this is goodbye then. Ned said. Only for a little while. Robert replied. I'll see you in a moon's time in King's Landing. Around them the rest of the royal retinue continued through the gates, save 2. What am I meant to do once you're gone, Ned? I don't know and I don't care. Ned replied. I want nothing to do with whatever madness follows. Robert sighed. I'm going to miss you, Ned. This last month has been one of the best of my life. If only Ned could say the same. Behind them they heard wailing, and Ned suppressed a smile. This was just another reason why Ned was glad he was not traveling with the king's retinue. If Robert had been upset at having to leave Winterfell, and on the terms Ned had demanded of him, Cersei Lannister had been outright furious. She had simmered in icy fury when Robert had told her that Ned had refused his demands for a betrothal, and wailed and wept for hours when they had announced that Tommen was to be kept in the north, officially to serve as Ned's squire. Tommen! She cried, Tommen! Tommen though rode on a shaggy pony next to Artos, Alaric and Jon. Stop your wailing, woman, for God's sake. Robert suddenly roared. Tom and Ned's sons came to a stop next to them, and Ned greeted them all with a nod of the head. Together they watched as the last of the retinue rode through the gates. Robert sighed, and turned to his youngest son. He seemed on the verge of saying something meaningful before nodding his head and turning his horse. "Be good," were his last words, and then he was gone. Ned turned back around, and beheld the other man who had remained behind. Tyrion Lannister had decided to remain behind, however, having a desire to see the wall. Ned nodded at him too, and then Lannister and Stark rode back to Winterfell. Chapter 8, Jon 2, The High Council. Summary. The High Council of the North is called to order. A good boy shows up too. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Jon watched as his Lord Father called the meeting of the Northern High Council to order. Present were all the lords and individuals in the North who held the positions of power. Within this room were the men who could make and break entire kingdoms. These were the men who managed the North's finances, trained their troops and guarded their borders. These were the men that Lord Eddard Stark had handpicked to run the North, and all of them were the best at what they did. Jon sat by his father's right hand at the head of the table. On his father's left sat Maester Luwin, who would record the meeting for the archives that were housed in the library of Winterfell. Down below them sat the 9 men that served the Northern Realms. In front of Jon sat the Master of Coin, Lord Wyman Marndaeli. Lord Marndaeli had served the North in such a way since before Rickard's rebellion. He was a man of enormous appetites, but behind those rolls of fat and insipid smile sat an incredibly cunning and intelligent man. It took such a man to run the massive trade empire that the Starks controlled, as well as managing the finances of the North. Next to the Master of Coin sat the first Southerner to ever sit on the Northern High Council. His appointment had stirred much controversy at the time, but after Sir Brynden Tully had proven himself as Master of the Moat, his critics became much less vocal. Brynden Tully sat with Bern Saltstock, the Lord Admiral of the Northern Fleets. The two men were close friends. Their positions in the North meant that they often spent time together. The most powerful ships of the Northern Fleet were stationed at the underground docks of Moat Cailin. On the other side of the table Roderick Walton sat, his form wrapped in his trademark armor and his famous blade resting on his back. He was the man who needed no introduction no matter where he walked. Rickard's rebellion has made into one of the most feared men in Westeros, and Jon knew from first-hand experience where this fear came from. Next to Roderick was a man who was not as well known, but should have been as much, if not more feared. Bowen Blackmire was a diminutive Cranogman, but he was a powerful and skilled warg. It was for this reason that he had been named the Warden of Wargs, and he was responsible for policing the way wargs used their animals as well as fighting the White Eye. When the North went to war, he would also be the one in charge of their famed warg legions. The final man on that side of the table had only arrived in Winterfell last night, and his presence was not a good omen. Ethan Glover had left to travel the world with Jon's grandfather, Rickard Stark, 14 years ago. Nowadays he acted as Rickard Stark's representative the world over. No one had seen nor heard from Rickard Stark in 4 years, however Ethan Glover dropped in from time to share news of his grandfather or bring Jon, Robb and Gendry to him. The last time Jon has seen his grandfather was 4 years ago in Braavos. Ethan Glover was their unofficial Master of Eyes, since their official one, his grandfather, was never here. At the end of the table sat the final 2 members of the High Council. Great Jon Umber, the Warden of War, and Benjen Hardstark, the feared Lord Beyond the Wall and Jon's uncle. Both were also incredibly skilled fighters, and Jon knew no better brawler than the Great Jon himself. He had once seen Great Jon take on 11 of his own guards in a drunken rage and beaten them soundly. He had emerged with barely a bruise, and Jon had understood at that time why the Umbers took a chained giant for their sigil. My lords, his father called, let us begin. We have limited time and much to do. That we do. Uncle Benjen agreed. There are rumblings from beyond the wall. The rumors are true. A new king has arisen. A new king beyond the wall. Great Jon asked, do we know who? Mance Rayder. Benjen confirmed. A former sworn brother of the Night's Watch. A deserter then? Jon said. Benjen shrugged half-heartedly. In a way, but that is not how he, or the wildlings see it. He was born a wildlings, you see. The get of a wilderling woman raped by a black brother. Mance Rayder. His father mused. You've met him, John? I have. John asked, searching his memories for a black brother that was a wilderling. In his mind he saw a great bearded figure clad in rough furs and a black cloak. He came to Winterfell when Corgyle yet led the watch. If I remember correctly, he promised not to tell anyone that you planned on dumping a mountain of snow on Fat Tom. John's jaw dropped open. He did remember Mance Rayder, a wiry man of average height that was clad in black furs, black armor and black leather. A true brother of the Night's Watch. Now he was king beyond the wall though. What's this wilderling king doing? Roderick Walton asked. Is he planning on marching south? I believe so. Benjen said. Most wildlings are congregating in 3 spots. From the talk of the free folk we trade with, one host under Tormund Giantsbane is gathering in the haunted forest, while Mance is gathering another on the banks of the Milkwater. The worst news though is that the Thans have left their valley. They are gathering a 3rd host in the Skirling Pass. The Thans have left their valley? John asked, his curiosity aroused. The Thans hadn't left their valley in 10,000 years. Why would they leave their valley now? Only the gods know. Benjen said. But there is one thing that is without doubt. He means to attack Hardham. Attack Hardham? Lord Stark asked, what is there for him in Hardham? Ships. Benjen replied. Next to him the great John whistled lowly. Crafty bastard. We'll march to the wall and he'll slip past us with our own ships. A great plan. Bernsold Stark scoffed. He will have an abundance of ships to be sure. But how will he sail them without sailors? I don't know. Benjen replied. Perhaps he means to capture some of my sailors alive. Perhaps he knows himself. In the end though, somehow he would get past the wall. That is inevitable. Unless we deal with the 3 separate hosts now, soon we will face a united wilderling host, said to be anywhere from 10,000 to 200,000 strong. If Mance Rayder has 200,000 men then I'm the bloody blessed bastard himself. Great John scoffed. Mance would be lucky to gather 100 wildlings to his cause. Everyone knows that the wildlings are just as likely to fight themselves as they are to fight us. Regardless of the size of Mance Rayder's host, Lord Stark interrupted, Lord Hardstark has a point. If he does have 3 separate hosts, then we cannot allow them to gather together. Jon's father turned to him. John, you will lead a host to the Milkwater to break Mance's host and if you can, capture him alive. I will. John asked, a little surprised. There were men in this very room who were more capable than him, and outside of this room, 10 score more could be found. What of Uncle Benjen? John asked. Surely he would be better at leading a host through the lands of Always Winter. Or what of the great John or even Roderick Walton? You're right. John's father responded. Which is why they will be going with you too. We will. Roderick Walton asked. Yes. Lord Stark replied. Watch over him, advise him and help him. When he returns you will tell me how he went. Lord Stark turned to John. Consider this your first battle command. It is better for you to get this experience against the bone daggers of wildlings than the steel swords of Southron knights. How many men will I have under my command? John asked. 1,000, his father replied. I have already written a raven to Lord Commander Mormont. He has promised 300 men of the Night's Watch. I shall further provide you with 300 weirwood warriors and 400 winter wolves. On top of that, I expect some members of your wolf pack will wish to accompany you. I permit you to take no more than 10. John swallowed. His father was showing an incredible amount of faith in him by bestowing upon him this command. The lives of over 1,000 men would rest in his hands. That was no small responsibility, especially when you were leading them into the hostile lands beyond the wall. John dipped his head in acknowledgement of his father's orders before pushing it to the back of his mind. Already the High Council around him were moving on from the discussion of the king beyond the wall. John had to move on too. It would do no good to let anyone know how nervous he was. He remembered the lessons his mother had given him, and he masked his features into a cold, expressionless facade. Now with Mance Rayder out of the way. His father was saying, "We need to talk about the state of the South." "What of it?" Great John asked. "Who cares? One day when the White Wolf comes, the South will be as relevant to us as the wildlings are to the Dornish. The South sits on the brink of war, my lords. Make no mistake, while the realm seems at peace, Robert is the only thing holding this realm together. Once he is gone, these 7 kingdoms will splinter into a war that will be worse than the Dance of the Dragons, and take more lives than my own father's rebellion." "What of it?" Great John asked. "Let the South go to war, I say. Let them waste their armies upon each other. When the time comes, an army of Northerners will sweep south to right all the wrongs and reclaim our crown." "What of it?" John's father asked, his face clouded with not anger, but something close. "What of the Vale Lords and River Lords who fought with us at Stony September and the Trident? What of Denizorin and Yoan Royce? What of Titus Blackwood and Jason Mallister? What of our friends and allies in the South? Shall we just leave them to fight their wars alone? What can we do?" Wyman Marndale asked. "The bloody accords are clear, Lord Stark. They are not to be broken. I still don't believe that you should be Hand of the King." "Cregan Stark did it," his father responded. "And so you have argued?" Wyman replied. "While I do not agree, I can see what you are saying. It is for that alone that I have not refused to support you. For now all this arguing is pointless." Roderick Walton interceded. "Instead of focusing on what happens after Robert dies, why don't we focus on keeping him alive? That will give us all more time to plan. That will give the White Wolf more time to rise." "How long though?" Bowen Blackmire asked. "How much longer must we wait for this savior of ours? The gods showed the bloody blessed bastard many things, Lord Bowen," Roderick Walton said. "His visions have yet to be proven wrong. He was right about Mount Starpoint. He was right about the Wolf's Moor. He was right about the Dance of the Dragons. He will be right about the White Wolf too." "You have a valid plan, Lord Commander," John interrupted, "but Robert is not long for this world. He is a stag surrounded by lions who are growing hungrier and hungrier by the day. I don't know what more we can do to keep him alive." "We can show strength," John's father said, his grey eyes steely in their resolve. "In the South their memories are short and they forget very easily. My father's absence has been noted. They think the burnt lord is gone. To them he is now just a distant memory, someone to scare your children with, not to fear yourself. As to us, my lords, they have forgotten our strength. They forgot what happened to John Connington at Stony September. They forgot what happened to Randil Tarly besides the shores of God's Eye. They have forgotten what happened to Roriger at the Trident." Lord Stark got to his feet, and John's father was gone. In his place was the man the South called the Stranger's Wolf. A warrior to be feared and respected, a man that you did not cross. "Well, we shall remind them. We shall show them why it was us that tore down the Dragon Lords from on high. We shall show the South who exactly it is that lurks in the north watching King Robert's back. Here, here." The great John bellowed as he slammed his ale horn down upon the table. "Lord Marndale," Eddard Stark said as he turned to the Master of Coin. "How goes our coffers?" "Well, my lord," Lord Marndale replied. "They are brimming with coin in preparation for the coming winter. I want figures. How much do we have?" Wyman shuffled the papers in front of him. "As you would know, we have 3 main coffers. The first of them, and the smallest, sits here in Winterfell. Those coffers contain just over 1 million golden dragons. The second coffer in White Harbor is our largest and holds 4 million golden dragons. Then we also have our account with the Iron Bank that is currently worth 7 million golden dragons. Between them all that makes 12 million golden dragons. On top of that we have coin tied up in investments in Essos, and the trading cartels, as well as a number of smaller coffers scattered throughout the north." "Good," Lord Stark replied. "We have enough then. While Robert was here, he told me the state of the realm's finances. The realm currently sits in 6 million dragons debt." 6 million dragons! John exclaimed. "What did they spend it all on?" "Tourneys and feasts for the most part," Wyman Marndale responded. "I have been keeping an eye on it for a while now. How much of that debt is owed to the Lannisters? Lord Stark asked. Lord Marndale shuffled some more papers before giving a figure. About 3 million. The great Jon whistled lowly. An impressive figure. Lord Stark nodded. Gather 3 million dragons from the White Harbor coffers, load them onto the most secure ships we have, and they will come south with me when I head for King's Landing. What for? Jon asked. We will have need of that gold come winter. Lord Stark turned to Jon. Our king is a stag surrounded by lions. Most of the lions' power lies in the gold the stag owes them. By buying out the Lannisters' share of the debt, any Lannister power is directly transferred to us. It's a good plan. Lord Wyman Marndale said. But will we ever get our gold back? Robert already owes us 500,000 golden dragons from 5 years ago. He is yet to even begin repayments. He will pay. Lord Stark said. Or he will suffer the same fate as Aerys. I will make this known to him as well. Robert is many things, but stupid is not one of them. Lord Stark paused and took a sip of his ale. Byrne, I want you to organize a fleet to escort the gold and us south. Byrne nodded. I will get on it right away. I also want transport for 2,000 troops and a retinue of northern lords. It shall be done. Good. Martin. Lord Stark called, and the doors to the council chambers cracked open and the captain of the guards stepped through. Martin Castle was one of House Stark's most loyal servants and had served in both the Company of the Rose and the Winter Wolves. He had been present at the infamous clash at the Tower of Joy, where Sir Gerald Hightower had been killed and Lyanna's corpse had been found. Yes, my lord? He asked. Gather 2,000 of your best men and prepare them for a march to White Harbor. I need loyal men in King's Landing while I am there. I have no intention of suffering the same fate as my brother. At once, my lord. With that, Martin Castle turned and rushed to fulfill his lord's bidding. Which lords will you take with you? Lord Marndale asked. Lord Stark stewed on the question for a moment before responding. Summon Lords Bolton, Carstark, Mormont and Glover of the founding families. I want either the lord or the heir of all the cadet houses as well. You and Lord Blackmyra shall come as well, Lord Marndale. Lord Marndale and Bowen Blackmyra nodded their heads. If Jon's father had have gone south without either of those two lords, Jon would have been concerned for his welfare. As it was, though, the only man more capable of protecting him than those two was Roderick Walton. And he would be busy preparing for his trek north of the wall with Jon. The South won't know what's hit them. Benjen said. It will be the hour of the wolf come again. The second hour of the wolf. Lord Stark mused. I like that. What of your father, Lord Stark? What does he have to say on this? Every eye turned to Ethan Glover, who had been silent up until now. He shrugged. Very little, I imagine. He's distracted with other things. Like what? Lord Stark asked. Fulfilling his duties as the Master of Eyes. And? Jon asked. What does he know? Ethan leant forward. I received news 2 days ago from Lord Rickard confirming rumors that have been circulating for months. The White Eye and the Faceless Men were at war. Were? Uncle Benjen asked. What do you mean were? 3 days ago someone burnt down the House of Black and White in Braavos. The statement hung in the air for a long time and no one dared to respond. Who? Someone managed to finally sputter out. Who burnt it down? We don't know. Ethan Glover replied. But with the House of Black and White gone, the White Eye are the only elite assassins left in the world. They will now have a monopoly on all the killing contracts. This will make them more powerful than ever. Roderick Walton said. How goes the fight against them? Worse than ever. Bowen Blackmyra replied. We still know nothing about them. Our own wargs have managed to shut down their charters in our major cities, but they still run amok in the south and in the countrysides. Lord Stark sighed heavily. Has my father found anything else? Yes. Ethan Glover replied. The rumors surrounding Torrhen Snow's expedition into Valyria were nothing more than that. Rumors. At the mention of the Pirate King's name, the temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Across the table, Byrne Salt Stark's eyes were as cold as ice, and he was as taut as a bowstring. Torrhen Snow's name lived in infamy in the north. To some he was a dashing hero, to others a cursed kinslayer. Jon had spent many years with Torrhen Snow when he was younger, and he didn't believe he was either. He had been young when he had left. As Jon had thought on it over the years, he was certain the fires that Torrhen had lit had not been meant for his father's wife and firstborn son. It's not surprising. Byrne Salt Stark spat. His talk has always been bigger than his walk. He has, however, Ethan continued, acquired a number of very rare Valyrian artifacts, some of which he sold to us through a broker in Braavos. Where did he get them? Jon asked. Ethan shrugged. I don't know. You would have to ask him yourself. What else of the Pirate King? Lord Stark asked. Has he been on any more trips? He has. He has been given the exclusive trade contracts with the Sothroios colonies, and continues to stake his claim upon the Stepstones. Last I heard, his last rival, a pirate named Salad Horsaran from Lys, had bent the knee to him and given up his fleet. How large is his fleet now? Lord Marndaly asked. We believe it to be about 600 ships, and some 25,000 men. 25,000 pirates. Byrne Salt Stark spat. I've heard from the sailors that he has been attacking shipping through the straits. The Dornish are unhappy and are sending envoys to King's Landing to have the problem dealt with. The Dornish will have to learn to live with it. Jon said. You know Torrhen better than any of Lord Saltstark. He is an admiral without peer, and by your own admission he sails the greatest ship to have ever been produced by your shipyards. Any force sent against him would have great trouble, even a Greyjoy one. And that brings me to the next matter. Ethan Glover interrupted, the Greyjoys. I know. Lord Stark said with a sigh. They are building their fleets up. We can't keep them from rebelling with promises forever. Wyman Marndaly warned. I know. Lord Stark said, but what more can I do, short of letting them take the crown they have hungered after ever since Aegon burned Harrenhal to the ground? There is a greater threat, Lord Stark, than having to pick between our longtime allies and our king. Ethan Glover said. Already the Ironborn serving in the company that are finishing their contracts are not resigning. Instead they are going home. The news is that Balon plans to declare himself a king upon the death of King Robert. How many Ironborn have left so far? Not many. Ethan replied. About 300. But the number is growing. Have you warned the company? Jon asked. We have. Ethan replied, the Captain General and his captains are discussing what to do even now. Lord Stark stewed in silence for a while before turning to Byrne Salt Stark. I want you to increase the patrols around Cape Kraken and ready the western fleets. Fortify the rivers Moor and Moat Cailin and transfer some troops to the Flint Cliffs. May I also suggest transferring Kyle Waterman from White Harbor to Blazewater Bay? Byrne suggested. Lord Stark nodded in agreeance. Kyle Waterman was one of 2 humans in the world that had watched with one of the fearsome blue whales that swam throughout the frigid northern waters. He had served valiantly in Ricard's rebellion and was responsible for the breaking of the Red Wine Fleet. He was experienced, and an invaluable force for the Northern Navy. You may. Balon won't be stupid enough to attack us. Jon said. His son rides with me. Perhaps not, Jon. Uncle Benjen responded, but it doesn't hurt us to be safe. Theon is the 4th son of Balon Greyjoy. If Balon was offered a crown in exchange for his 4th born, would he take the crown or keep his son? Jon didn't know how to respond, so kept silent. Around him the council shuffled their papers, and prepared to leave. There was little more to discuss. Is that all, my lords? No one brought anything new forth, so Lord Stark dismissed them. The lords shuffled out of the room, but his Uncle Benjen remained behind. Brother. Uncle Benjen said when everyone else had left and the door had closed behind them. Do you remember that raven you sent me a few years back? Which one? Lord Stark asked. Jon made to leave, but his uncle caught him by the arm. Stay, Jon. This concerns you too. Benjen turned back to his brother, while Jon took a seat. The one where you asked me about direwolves. His father's head snapped up from the ledgers he was looking at so quickly. Jon heard something crack. You succeeded? He asked. I did. Benjen replied, and his mouth burst into a grin. They will be here by tonight. What will? John asked. Direwolves, boy. John's father exclaimed, his excitement and joy evident. Direwolves. House Stark will have direwolves again. John looked at his uncle incredulously, who nodded in confirmation. How many? John asked. 3. Benjen replied. 2 males and 1 female. And that's not all. The kennel master at our home has confirmed the female is pregnant. Night couldn't come fast enough in John's opinion. Meeting the direwolves was going to be a family affair, and all his siblings were present as well as his mother, father and cousin. Uncle Benjen had left the city with one of his men, a certain Khor in half hand, to meet the retinue on the road and escort them into the city. John's father had gathered them all in the private courtyard of the Stark family. It was a secluded and small place away from the bustle of the castle. Alaric and Artos were sparring with practice swords as they waited, while Arya and Deanna cheered them on. John sat with Robb on a low stone fence as their parents watched from the ramparts above the courtyard. So you're going north, I hear? Robb said. Aye. John replied. Father has placed me in command of 1,000 men. I have orders to break Mance Rayder's host, and if possible capture him alive. Who's going with you? The great John. Uncle Benjen and Roderick Walton. And father also said I could take 10 of the wolf pack. Only 10? Robb asked. Who are you going to take? Sam. John replied. Gendry. Small John. A few others. What about me? Robb asked. Will you take me? No. Why not? You were right, Robb. A war is coming. I need you to protect my father. Watch over him, and when the time comes serve him faithfully. Do whatever he asks of you, and do whatever he needs of you. Remember, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. Robb finished with a shaky grin. The pack always survives. John smiled at his cousin, a man he considered more than a brother, and enveloped him in a hug. I'm going to miss you, Robb, when I'm fighting wildlings in the north. I'll miss you too. John went to say more, but was interrupted by a commotion from the gates. Uncle Benjen rode through, a grin lighting up his face, and a small bundle of fur cradled in his arms. She gave birth. He exclaimed before he had even jumped from his horse. 6 pups. He cried, 6 pups, and this one was the oldest. Uncle Benjen held up the squirming bundle within his arms, and John looked at it in amazement. His heart stopped in his chest, and around him time seemed to stop. Its fur was white, and its eyes were as red as the leaves that hung from the branches of the weirwood. Silence greeted Benjen's declaration while all stared at the animal in his arms. A white wolf. Lord Stark remarked as he made his way down from the parapets. The only question now is, whose white wolf is it? Notes. And here are the direwolves. I dropped a lot of info this chapter, so it might be a bit overwhelming. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop a comment. And even if you don't, drop a comment anyway and let me know if you liked it or loathed it. And next chapter is a big time skip. For the next chapter is part 1 of the second hour of the wolf. By the way, I have decided to post the pairing I have in plan for Robb. Every few chapters I will release another character's pairing so you guys can have a sort of idea of what is coming. I will say though that John's pairing will not be published until it happens. Chapter 9, Eddard 3, The Second Hour of the Wolf. Summary. The second hour of the wolf begins. A bit of a time skip from last chapter, but I don't really want to write a filler chapter about what happened in the meantime. Notes. Here it is. Hope you like it. Please, let me know what you think. I'm really nervous about this chapter and the next, so help me out by leaving a comment. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Lord Eddard Stark had not seen King's Landing in 16 years. The last time he had been here, he had come with grief in his heart and a babe in his arms. His sister's bones had been carried in a casket behind him, and the stench of death lingered in his nostrils. Today it was a small army at his back, while in his nostrils the stench of shit lingered. It was the smell of this city, and it hadn't changed one bit. Ned had arrived at the capital city yesterday aboard a fleet of 40 ships. He had come with 2,000 winter wolves and a retinue of the most powerful lords in the north, as well as Lord Balon Greyjoy. Ned had ordered for all the Lord Paramounts to be summoned. A few he had business to deal with, while others he simply wanted to be there to witness what happens to those who cross him. Ned and his retinue of lords were making their way to the throne room now. Ned had called for the most influential lords to come, and they had come. Lords Bolton, Karstark and Marndale had come from the east, while from the west had come Lords Mormont, Glover and Dustin. On top of that, almost every cadet branch of House Stark was present, the only exception being House Karstark of Skagos. That house had only one member remaining, Lord Ragnar Karstark. Ned didn't think anyone had seen him in years either. He preferred to spend his days alone in the wilds of Skagos rather than the family holdfast of Scarhold. He had married no woman and bore no sons, trueborn or otherwise. Ned hadn't even bothered to send a raven. By the time he would have received it anyway, Ned would have had to be gone. At Ned's side trotted the direwolf that Benjen had captured in the lands beyond the wall. Ned had named it Skirling, after the pass in the lands beyond the wall, from which its ancestors were said to have hailed. Benjen had kept the other male as his own, and his was named Storold, after the peninsula on which he ruled. Farlin, the kennel master at Winterfell, believed the two to be brothers, as their coloring was very similar. They both had dark grey fur, though Skirling's was a shade darker. Skirling was also the larger, powerfully built with a wide muzzle and broad shoulders. Storold was thinner, and had more of a loping grace to him. Ned, Skirling and his retinue arrived at the throne room, and the doors were opened by his guards. Ned noted with approval that they had already secured much of the Red Keep. Soon his troops would have control of the entire city, and then the time would come to strike. Ned was leaving nothing to chance. He knew just how slippery the man he was after was. He had eluded justice for a long time now. No more. Inside the throne room all the gathered and summoned nobles rose to their feet. At the front of the hall, arrayed to the left of the Iron Throne, the entire small council was present. Lord Varys and Lord Baelish stood side by side, tittering and whispering about something or the other. Next to them Renly lounged with an easy smile upon his face, while the Grand Maester dozed in his seat. The last member present was Lord Stannis, who sat apart from the others and with one hand upon the sword that rested at his side. Many of the lords and ladies eyed the direwolf in consternation, and whispers broke out across the hall. Sir Barristan Selmy and the king had gone hunting in the Kingswood. They would not be present for the coming hour. And just as well. Ned did not know if Robert would be able to control his rage when he found out the truth of what Ned was about to present. Ned had had a hard enough time of it, and he was renowned for his patience and coolness. On the stands to the left of the throne and beyond the small council sat the lords that had been summoned. Lord Tywin Lannister sat closest to the throne, and Queen Cersei sat with him. He was surrounded by a retinue of 5 lords he had brought with him. Lords Crickehall, Lefford, Marbrand and Bainfort were present, as well as Tywin Lannister's favoured attack dog, Sir Gregor Clegane. Thankfully, someone somewhere had had the sense to sit Prince Oberyn Martell on the other side of the room. This did nothing to stop the murderous rage that played out across his features. His eyes smouldered and his teeth were bared in a snarl. His hands twitched, and the knives at his belt had never looked more dangerous. His rage only grew when he saw Lord Byrne Saltstark in Ned's retinue. In between Oberyn and Tywin sat the other lords. Edmure Tully had come to represent his father, while Daenerys Arryn had ridden down from the Vale when Lysa Arryn had refused the summons. It was good to see Daenerys again. He hadn't seen him in a long time. From the Reach had come Mace Tyrell, and he had brought his entire family with him. The only absent one was his eldest son, Willers. The man was crippled, they said, and had trouble traveling far distances. Ned's lords filed past him and took up the stands on the right of the Iron Throne. Ned's new squire, Prince Tommen, moved to stand at the base of the Iron Throne. Tommen had the makings of a good squire, though for now he was far too weak-hearted to ever be a warrior of any sort. Ned had seen weaker hearts though, and seen them changed by life with a Stark. Samwell Tarly had been a self-confessed craven and coward when he had first come north, but now he was one of the best fighters with a battle axe that Ned had ever seen. He wasn't as good as the Smalljan, but then again, no one was. Sam's friendship with Jon had helped tremendously, and Ned had been glad to see that while Tommen and Alaric had originally gotten off on the wrong foot, they had recently been getting along much better, to the point where they were becoming fast friends. At the sight of Tommen, a strangled cry escaped Queen Cersei and she made to run for him before being stopped by her father. Ned himself ignored the tumult around him and ascended up the steps of the Iron Throne before sitting at its height. Skirling lay across the base of the throne, his eyes watching those present warily. Ned peered down on the assembled lords and ladies and waited for the whole to fall silent. A strange mixture of curiosity and impatience caused the lords to fall silent far quicker than Ned expected, and he paused before finally speaking. "My lords," Ned began, 150 years ago my ancestor rode south. His name was Cregan Stark and he ruled as Hand of the King to Aegon the Oathbreaker for only 6 days. Those 6 days though have gone down in the history books as the Hour of the Wolf. It was in those 6 days that Cregan Stark cleansed the realm of the rot that had infested it before and during the Dance of the Dragons. Ned paused and looked at all of the present lords in the eye. Some refused to meet his gaze, while others stared back defiantly. If Cregan's rule of realm cleansing was the first hour of the wolf, then consider this the second hour. I have given the king 6 days of my time, and I have no intention of wasting any of them. Over the next few days many trials will be held, many executions will be undertaken and many guilty men will die. I will cleanse the realm of whatever rot has infested it in the last few years, and put this realm back to order." "Back to order?" Prince Oberyn Martell asked. "Order like we had in the days of the Targaryens?" Silence settled over the hall, and Ned slid his gaze towards the prince who had almost killed him. He hadn't changed very little, and had aged as well as a fine northern ale. His form was still strong, and his gaze piercing, while the same lazy smile lingered in the corners of his mouth. Ignoring him, Ned went on. "No doubt by now, many of you are wondering why you are here. Some of you are here because you are the ones from which this rot spreads. Some of you are here to witness what happens to those who spread rot in this realm. And some of you will not be here much longer." "And what if we don't want to be here?" Tywin Lannister asked. "Who are you to tell me when and where I must be and go?" "No doubt by now," Ned replied, "many of you have noticed the force of men I brought with me. As we speak, those men are securing the city. Already they have secured this keep. Soon the gates to the city will be shut, and the docks closed. No one will be able to leave this city without my consent. You don't have the men to take back the city, and neither do you have the authority. Your men will be kept within their garrisons until the end of my rule as Hand of the King. However, if you truly have no wish to be part of the coming hour, then by all means, tell me now and I shall let you go. I warn you however, when my armies and ships come south next, they will turn their backs on whoever turns their back on me now. If you wish to go, say so now and turn your back." Unsurprisingly, no one moved. No one wanted to be the ones to go without the support of the largest and most powerful realm in whatever wars were to come. "Good," Ned said, "I am glad to see that the South has not lost all of their sense. You have all chosen to stay, and if any have tried to leave this room without my permission, my men will assume that you are fleeing because you are guilty of crimes that I know of. In the North, there is only one punishment for fleeing from your crimes." Ned paused and let his last statement hang in the air. He watched the gathered lords took in the severity of what he had just said before continuing. "There is more you must know. The next few days will be binding upon the Iron Throne. The rules and precedents set forth will be ingrained within the crown, and cannot be changed. That was the agreement I struck with Robert, and I will not have it broken. I will not fix this realm, only to return in 5 years when someone has undone what I will do over the next few days. What is the use of beating my sword into a plowshare, if I must reforge it in a moon's time? It is pointless, like chasing the wind. I am a northerner. Unlike you of the south, I have no time to chase the wind." Ned sighed before looking out upon those assembled before him. By tomorrow this room would look a lot different. Men who stood here now would not be here, and others would find themselves in positions of newfound power. Words are also wind, my lords, and I have no time to chase after that sort of wind either. I will tell you all now, if I say you are guilty of committing a crime, or you have contributed to the rot that sits in this realm, know you are guilty of it. I would not accuse you without proof, and I have personally ensured that any proof I have is beyond reproach. Know this, those of you who lie will suffer tenfold. For those of you that insist upon your innocence even after I have proven you guilty before your lords and peers, you will suffer 20-fold. And for the most despicable among you, for those of you that have committed true crimes against the crown and not just contributed to the rot in this realm, for you your death is all but assured. The only thing I am deciding upon today is whether your death will be quick and merciful or painful and protracted. Ned looked around once more, and noted with a hint of amusement that those who were most guilty looked least concerned, while those who had nothing to fear looked as though they were the ones guilty of crimes. I have one last thing to say, my lords, before I begin. And that is this. The so-called Game of Thrones as you know it, is over. You wish to play your high-born games of masks and mockery, of gossip and espionage and grabs for power, then by all means go ahead and play. You will not, however, play this game with me or mine, or with King Robert's throne. That throne belongs to Robert of the House Baratheon, and none of us. It's not the Starks, it's not the Lannisters, and it's not even the bloody Targaryens. It's Robert's. My family won that throne for him on the battlefield, and if he needs we will keep that throne for him on the battlefield. Until he dies, you will not be arguing over it. Ned paused, and nodded to Martin who stood guard by the doors. With that being said, my lords, let us begin. Let it be known to highborn and commoner alike that the second hour of the wolf has begun. Martin slipped through the doors and emerged moments later with the Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks and his leading captains. Janos Slynt was the Lord Commander's name, and had never met more an incompetent gaggle of fools than the ones who stood before him now. His golden armor was polished to a shine, and the sword at his side was expensive castle-forged steel with a hilt of gilded gold and a heavily bejeweled pommel. It was far above the means of most lords, let alone the low-born Lord Commander of the City Watch. My lord, Janos Slynt said as he dropped to one knee before him, his jowly mouth twisted into what Ned supposed that Janos thought was a respectful smile. Rise, Lord Commander Slynt. Ned replied, and Janos Slynt rose to his feet. Ned stared down at the commander of the City Watch, evaluating the man before him. Janos stood in respectful silence, while his captains looked on in awe. Ned doubted they had ever been in this room, let alone seen it filled with the most powerful lords of Westeros. Tell me, Lord Commander, Ned began, how many years have you served the City Watch? 18, Lord. 18 years. Ned asked. So you were in the watch before Aerys was thrown from his throne? I was. Janos replied, I was one of the men on the walls when your father sacrificed that inbred bastard to your gods. Ned nodded. And how many years have you been Lord Commander? 8, Lord. 8 years. Ned mused. 8 years you have been in command of the City Watch. Now why do you think I called you and your captains here today? I don't know, Lord. Have a guess. Reward perhaps? Janos suggested with a grin. I'll have you know that these last few years in King's Landing crime has been dropping. Dropping, you say? Ned asked. Yes. Janos replied. Every moon my men get bothered less and less by the citizens of King's Landing. Ned got to his feet and made his way down the steps of the Iron Throne to where Janos Slynt stood. He looked him straight in the eyes, and almost immediately Janos' eyes flitted away. Lord Karstark, Ned said as he turned to his retinue. Bring me a block. Tommen, bring me ice. Both man and boy rushed away to do his bidding. Lord. Janos Slynt questioned, what are you doing? Ned turned to the other side of the room, where the lords who were not of the north were assembled. Behold, my lords, the first to fall. Janos says he was on the walls the day Rhaegar died. I was there. If Janos truly was upon that wall, then he fled with all the others. I name him a coward and craven. He shirked his duties. That is not the man that will lead the Gold Cloaks in any realm in which I am hand of the king. You would sentence me to death for abandoning the Mad King when his cause was lost. Janos roared, and his hand leapt to his sword. Skirling leapt to his feet, his teeth bared and a growl rumbling from his being. Janos Slynt fell silent, and dropped his hand from his sword. If I was Aerys I would, and I would be justified in doing so. Now however, not at all. Ned replied. I have not sentenced anyone to death of yet. What I just did was strip you of your office as Lord Commander of the City Watch. What? Janos replied, aghast. You cannot. I just did. Ned replied. And now I will name the crimes for which you are sentenced to death. Death. Janos replied weakly. For what crimes? You said something interesting before, Janos. Do you know what it was? Please, Lord. The man begged as he fell to his knees and tears began to fall down his cheeks. I'll do anything. Don't kill me. Ned turned to the lords, who were watching the spectacle with interest. Correct me if I am wrong, my lords, but earlier Janos Slynt said that crime had been dropping in this city. That each moon less and less reports were made to his men. The lords present nodded in agreement and Ned turned to the captains who had accompanied Janos Slynt. And what of you men? He asked, why has crime been dropping? The men shuffled their feet, but none answered until one with an iron hand stepped forward. Because they don't bother anymore. He all but spat. They know nothing is going to happen unless they pay the proper bribes. Bribes that most in King's Landing can't afford. Ned looked at the men long and hard. This man's eyes never left Ned's. What is your name? Jacelyn, my lord. The man replied. Jacelyn Bywater. Most men call me the Iron Hand of the old gods though. I understand the Iron Hand part. Ned replied, but what do you mean of the old gods? Jacelyn shrugged. I took to the old gods and the old way a few years back. It was a few weeks after the battle for King's Landing. I had been fighting on the Trident, and your lords had just let me free. On my way into the city I was marched past Roriger's Weirwood. It was on that day that I forswore the Seven, renounced my knightly oaths and began to practice the old way. Ned nodded. Congratulations on your new appointment. My lord. Jacelyn asked, the confusion evident on his face. What do you mean? You are now the Lord Commander of the City Watch. Fix it. Get rid of the corruption. Get rid of the bribes. Sack those who you need to, kill those who you have to. Do whatever you need to bring the City Watch back to its former glory. I will leave 200 of my best men with you to help you. They will follow your command, but I warn you, Lord Commander, the second you stray from the path I have set you on, they will bring you before the king in chains. Jacelyn looked shocked at the honor, before dropping to one knee. Thank you, my lord. He said. I will do my best to honor you and my gods. Ned nodded. I know you will. He said, and then he turned to the remaining captains. As for you lot, you have a choice to make. Soon Lord Karstark and my squire will be here. You can either join your former Lord Commander on the block, or you can travel to the wall on the next available ship. The doors opened and Ricard Karstark strode in, a great big black chunk of ironwood clasped in his hands. Behind him Tommen struggled with the length of ice. Both men made their way down the silent hall, their steps resounding loudly. Ricard Karstark dropped the block at the base of the Iron Throne, right next to Janos Slynt. Tommen walked to Ned and offered the blade to him hilt first. On the floor Janos Slynt burst into sobs. Please. He screamed, let me go to the wall. Please. His cries turned into a wordless scream as two of Ned's guards strode forward and gripped him by the arms. They dragged him over to the block and forced his head down upon it. In the stands where the lords of the south sat, Lord Tyrell got to his feet. Lord Stark. He cried, his face pale. You cannot mean to execute this man here, do you? Of course I do. Ned replied. Lord Tyrell looked aghast and gaped like a dying fish. He looked to his left where his young daughter sat. She was a pretty little thing, as delicate as the roses that graced her family's banners. Her eyes though gave away the good act she put on. I must protest, my lord. Mace Tyrell exclaimed. My daughter and mother are present, as well as the queen and many other noble ladies. Must we subject them to witness such a sight? Must any of us witness such a sight? Of course you must. Ned replied. I am deeply sorry if anyone here is going to be disturbed by what you're about to see, but that is what you are here for. Did I not say that you had been called as witnesses to what happens to those who spread rot within this realm? Well, this man here is the root of the rot within this very city, and as such he will be the first to fall, though dare I say, not the last. If you did not wish to see this, I gave you all an opportunity to turn your backs, an opportunity that none of you took. Mace Tyrell opened his mouth again, but Ned cut him off. And Lord Tyrell, if you did not wish for your daughter or mother to see such a sight, you should not have brought them with you. As far as I know, I commanded the king to invite you, not your entire family. So unless you have anything else you wish to say, I would kindly suggest that you sit down. Mace Tyrell looked at his mother, and Ned turned to the Queen of Thorns also. Her lips were set in a thin line and her eyes were cold. They watched Ned for a long while, before flicking to her son. She gestured to his seat and he sat. Ned leveled one last look at the Lord before turning back to Janos Slynt. Janos Slynt, in the name of Robert of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm, I, Eddard of the House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, sentence you to die for your crimes of bribery, corruption, murder, blackmail and conduct unworthy of a member of the City Watch. Ned turned to Tommen, whose face was pale and hands were shaking. Ned smiled sadly at the young prince, before firmly grasping the hilt of ice and wrenching it from its sheath of wolf's fur. He held the smoky, Valyrian steel blade high in the air for a second, before bringing it down quickly. Janos Slynt's sobs and struggles ended very quickly once his head was detached from his body. The blood gushed from his neck, and splashed onto the stone floor in front of the Iron Throne. Ned said a quick prayer to the old gods before turning back to the remaining captains. So? He asked, what will your choice be? Unsurprisingly, all of them chose to swear the oaths of the Night's Watch. Ned nodded, and waited at the bottom of the stairs of the Iron Throne while his soldiers escorted away the new recruits of the Night's Watch. Jeor Mormont would be happy. He was always in need of men, good or otherwise. Ned sighed and handed his blade back to Tommen. Tommen dutifully picked up the rag at his feet and wiped the blood off it. He looked like he was about to either retch or burst into tears, but Ned had been attentive in his training ever since he had taken him on, and he did not shirk from his duty. Ned climbed back up the steps of the Iron Throne, and over the next hour, scores of people were led into the throne room to be tried for different crimes. From wayward customs officials to cutthroats that roamed the streets of Flea Bottom, all were tried and punished. The minor ones Ned sentenced with fines, while some were sent to the wall. The worst though, Ned took straight to the block, including two men who had come from the Black Cells. Their names were Rorge and Biter, and both were strange, queer men that Ned was glad to see gone from this world. When the sun was high in the sky, the lists his men had brought him were empty of the common criminals, and it was time to begin with the nobility. As Ned climbed back up the Iron Throne, he took the opportunity to behold the lords and ladies who sat seated in the stands. Many were pale, and more than one was eyeing the large pool of blood in front of the Iron Throne with horror. Some looked nervous, no doubt wondering if they had been summoned to face the same fate, while others looked on with a steel mask. Of all of them though, it was Tywin Lannister who surprised him the most. Though his face was still a mask of steel, his eyes held an approving and admiring glint to them, though it was gone as quickly as it had occurred. Ned sat down, and Tommen followed him up the stairs to offer him a glass of wine. Ned took that goblet thankfully and quenched his parched throat. Executing criminals was thirsty work. "My lords," Ned called when Tommen had retreated once more, "I am sure you will be glad to know that for now, we are done dealing with the common criminals. With those that have spread their rot within this city. It is now time to deal with those who have spread their rot throughout this realm. Remember what I told you at the beginning, my lords. For those of you that lie, the punishment will be tenfold. For those of you who deny, the punishment shall be 20-fold. The lords nodded nervously, and Ned reached for the list in his pocket. He withdrew it carefully, and made an act of unrolling it. The tension on the other side of the room was almost palpable. Ned wasn't one to relish in these sort of mind games, but he took immense satisfaction in watching Petyr Baelish squirm where he sat. Oh, how he would make that man suffer for what he had done. And he would take great pleasure in it too. Ned glanced down at the scroll and read the name that was first on his list. Lord Tywin Lannister. He called. The old lion didn't move for a second, instead just watching Ned. Just when it was reaching the point of insubordination, Tywin Lannister slowly rose to his feet. He made his way down from where he was seated slowly, each step measured and each movement precise. His eyes were cold, but Ned could see the mind whirring away within. Surely he was wondering what he had been called up here for. Tywin Lannister finally arrived before the Iron Throne, and stood tall with his arms clasped behind his back, his legs planted firmly. It was clear to all the image that Tywin was trying to convey. Ned didn't need an image though to know that Tywin Lannister was a powerful and intelligent lord. As much as Ned may have wished otherwise, this would not be the trip where he would be making an enemy of Tywin Lannister. That would be saved for later, for the days when the White Wolf in the north was grown. Lord Stark. Tywin greeted with a small sneer. If you think you can call me like a wayward dog, and then drag me before this throne and accuse me of whatever crimes you think I have committed, you will find that my reputation is above reproach. I may have done many horrible things in my time, but all I have done the advancement of my house and my family, and last I checked that wasn't a crime. Indeed, that was what your father did during his grand rebellion. Ned nodded. You are right, my lord. The advancement of house and family is not a crime. And I agree with you also, that while you have done horrible things none of them were crimes, at least crimes of which I can prove before your peers today. Out of the corner of his eye, Ned saw Prince Oberyn scoff and glare at the both of them, while before him Tywin nodded. I am a leal servant of the crown, Lord Stark, and I challenge you to prove me otherwise. I won't bother wasting my time or yours. Ned replied, as I said at the start of this, I have no to chase the wind. And I have not called you before the throne today to question your actions or accuse you of crimes. Indeed, of the people in this room today, you are of the few who has my utmost respect and admiration as a man who was both lord of a rich realm and hand of the king. I am doing this for 6 days and I am struggling. I have no clue how you managed for as long as you did, especially when we consider that you were hand to Aerys when he still lingered on the brink of insanity and had not yet tipped over the edge. Ned saw a crack in Tywin's veneer faked, and a look of pride flashed across his features before being quickly suppressed. I have called you before the throne today, Ned continued, to discuss the state of the realm's finances and the amount of debt this throne owes to you. Tywin nodded. What would you like to know? How much has King Robert borrowed from you? 3,100,000. Tywin Lannister replied. Ned nodded and turned to Lord Mandaily. Have them brought in now, Lord Mandaily, and get me the transfer papers. Tywin watched the exchange silently, and Ned waited patiently while Wyman Mandaily carried out his commands. After barely a moment, the doors swung wide open and the chests that had been carefully counted and loaded at White Harbor were brought into the room by the most trusted and loyal men that could be found in the north. It was no small amount in the chests that were being brought into the room. When the last chest had been laid down, and Wyman Mandaily had handed Ned the papers he needed, Ned turned back to Tywin Lannister. There is your 3,100,000 golden dragons the crown owes you, Lord Lannister. Here is the paperwork that accompanies those chests. Tywin glanced at the piles of chest with an appraising eye. How many chests are there? He asked. 50, Ned replied, each loaded with 62,000 golden dragons each. Counted under the watchful of mine and Lord Mandaily's most trusted men. If you wish, you can count them yourself. Tywin quickly did the math in his head, and Ned waited for him to figure out what Ned had done. And what of the interest? Tywin asked. Interest? Ned replied. What interest? The crown owes me 310,000 golden dragons in interest. The crown owes you nothing more. Ned scoffed. The fact that your grandson will sit upon the Iron Throne is interest enough. Take your money and go. No, a voice called, and Ned flicked his eyes to see Queen Cersei rise to her feet. As Queen, I command that the interest be paid. As Hand of the King, I have said that the interest has already been paid. My decision stands. I am the Queen. And I am the Hand of the King. Ned replied to Cersei. If you think you have any power over me because you are Queen, you are sorely mistaken. I only accepted this position on a few conditions, conditions that Robert agreed to. One of which was that my decisions are final. Ned glared at the Queen before turning back to Lord Tywin. Take the money now, or lose all of it with no hope of getting it back. And if your daughter speaks out of turn again, you will lose it regardless. Tywin stared at Ned coldly, before bowing stiffly and turning his back. Ned's men moved in from the walls to secure the chests, and Martin Castle approached Lord Lannister to see what he wanted done. Ned turned his gaze back to the other lords and breathed in deeply. He did not even have to look to his list to know who he was about to call. He had dreamt of this moment for months now, ever since he had heard that Jon Arryn had died. It had consumed his thoughts more than he cared to admit, and the moment of his wrath was finally here. "My lords," Ned called as he got to his feet, "my lords." The lords and ladies in the stands quietened down and turned their attention away from the wealth of a nation that sat in front of them and towards the imposing man who stood atop the Iron Throne. "My lords," Ned began, "there are only two men who I care for in the South the same as I care about a Northerner. The first is Robert, who was raised beside me as a brother. We laughed together, we cried together, and when the time came we fought together. Robert was my brother in all but name. He wronged me and my family much, but through it all my love for him held firm, and his love for me did so too." Ned paused and looked directly at Varys. "The other man I loved was a man who had never wronged me. He had raised me from 8 years of age, and Robert too. He was a man who desired peace above all, but when war came he stood by those he loved. He stood by the sons that he had taken for his own since the gods had given him none. When his king called for him to kill me, he burned his king's commands and called his banners instead. He was the man who first declared his support for my family, and my father. He was the man who watched the realm while Robert whored and drunk. He was a great man, and he is dead. Jon Arryn was his name, and he was as good as a father to me as my own was. It is for that reason, and only for that reason, that I came south at all. The love I bore for him meant I could not let his murder go unavenged." Ned's final words hung in the air, and it took a second for those gathered to garner the meaning of his words. Immediately the throne room burst into roars and yells. Ned sat in silence for a moment, and absorbed the shock and anger that was racing around the room. "Name his name," Mace Tyrell called, "name him and we shall take his head. He who killed the Hand of the King deserves nothing less," Renly declared. "Who was it?" Oberyn Martell asked, his expression bemused. "My uncle," Daenerys Arryn roared, "who murdered my uncle." Ned raised his hand and the whole quietened. "I have brought you all here today to witness what happens to those who harm those who I care for. I care for few outside of the North, but harm those who I do, and you had best start praying to whatever gods you believe in. Because mine sure won't be merciful. And neither shall I." Ned rose to his feet and began to carefully make his way down the dais, ice clutched in one hand. Its length rippled in the shadows, and among the pile of dragon-smelted steel upon which he walked, it was the blade of a king. "It seems that you of the South did not learn from Rhaegar and Aerys. It seems that you have become blind to their fates, even as Rhaegar sits in eternal agony before the gates of this city every day. It seems you have forgotten the names that I and my father carry. It seems that you have forgotten our reputations. Today, you will remember. You will remember why my father is the Burnt Lord and I am the Stranger's Wolf. You will learn why our names are whispered of in fear by your small folk, and our faces haunt your soldiers' nightmares. You will learn why the sound of wolves is the sound of war and the sight of white and grey banners is the sight of death. You will learn why you did not anger me, or my house. You will learn today, or you will die tomorrow. You will die like he who murdered Jon Arryn is about to die." Ned paused and turned to the murderer of Jon Arryn. "Petyr Baelish. Step forth and answer for your crimes." Notes. Not sure when the next chapter will be uploaded. Still trying to figure out a few small details and dialogue between certain characters. Please, let me know what you think. I'm really nervous about this chapter and the next, so help me out by leaving a comment. Chapter 10, Eddard IV, The Second Hour of the Wolf 2. Summary. The Second Hour of the Wolf concludes and Ned heads back home. Notes. I'm so sorry for the lack of updates. I meant to upload this 3 days ago, but I came down with a flu and it's kept me from doing everything. I'm just beginning to get over it, so hopefully I'll be able to upload a bit more. Thanks for the support and please leave a review and tell me what you think. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Petyr Baelish got to his feet slowly and warily. His eyes moved around the room, searching for allies. Yet alas, none were to be found. Ned had routed them from this room, before they had even arrived. The entirety of those gathered stared at the Lord of the Littlest Finger. Silence hung heavily in the air, so thick not even a Valyrian steel blade could have cut it. But Ned's voice could. "Lord Baelish, step forward and answer for your crimes, or I shall have you dragged before me like a common criminal." "Lord Stark," Baelish said with a slight frown, "forgive me, I'm a bit confused." "What part confuses you, my lord?" "Which charge?" "The charge of treason. The charge of murder. The charge of adultery. The charges of embezzlement and corruption." Baelish flicked his eyes to the door, and most probably briefly considered running. But as quickly as that fancy came, it went. Petyr Baelish returned his gaze to Ned. His eyes burned with anger, but his face was a mask of serenity. Littfinger breathed in once, and then stepped forth. The mummer's farce had begun. "Crimes, my lord?" he asked. "I don't know what crimes you think I have committed, but I can assure you that I will defend my innocence until my dying breath. I accuse you of murdering Jon of House Arryn, Hand of the King, Lord of the Eyrie and Lord Paramount of the Vale. Do you deny it?" Baelish looked shocked for a second, before rearranging his features in a mask of cold rage. "I deny it," he barked. "I deny it emphatically. Lord Arryn was like a father to me. I owe everything to him, including my position on the small council. I would not betray him for anything. And yet you killed him." "I did not," Baelish replied angrily. "You cannot just throw these accusations before me without proof, Lord Hand. I don't care how much authority or power the king gave you in this realm. Those are the laws of gods and men. Don't speak to me of the laws of gods and men." Ned scoffed. "What would you know of them?" "More than you, it seems," Baelish replied. "You are yet to offer any proof of any crimes I have committed. This is your last chance to confess, Lord Baelish. I promise you now, deny your crimes again and I will ensure your death is the most painful I can come up with." "I deny it," Baelish replied. "And I still wait upon your proof." Ned sighed. "Very well. You have chosen your path, Lord Baelish, and now it is time you walk upon it. You have no proof of anything," Baelish stated. "If this is a trial, I deserve a defense. Let me speak to my peers and have them judge me." Ned smiled thinly. He knew Petyr's game. For today, though, he was prepared to play. "If you think these lords are your peers, Lord Baelish, you will find you are sorely outmatched. These are the men that rule over the men that rule over men like you. I am the man that rules over them. Today I am judge, jury and executioner. Say your piece, and try to convince me of your innocence." Baelish swallowed and returned Ned's smile. "There are many men within this city who can vouch for my character. Since arriving, Lord Stark, you have branded me a craven and a coward, a traitor and a murderer." "I brand you more than just that," Ned cried. "I brand you a man without honor. I brand you an oath-breaker and a liar. More accusations and yet no proof." Baelish cried in reply. "Your precious proof is coming," Ned replied. "My men have ridden for days and nights to bring me the proof that will bring me your head. You would need a lot of proof to convict me of anything. I don't need 1,000,000 witnesses to your crimes, each paid 1,000,000 dragons to lie to convict you of the crimes you are guilty of. I only need one witness. One witness who can testify that you killed Jon Arryn. You have no such proof." Ned smiled coldly and nodded. And waited. As did the court. As did Baelish. Soon, one of his guardsmen, a man by the name of Wylard, entered the hall. He approached Ned, and climbed up the Iron Throne to speak with him. "They are here," he whispered. Ned nodded and Wylard left to collect them. The doors opened and in strode Sir Brynden Tully and Lord Yohn Royce. They both dropped to one knee before him. Ned hadn't seen Bronze Yohn since he had come north to personally talk with Ned about getting his son, Waymar, into the Company of the Rose. Ned had pulled some strings for him and Waymar Royce had found himself as a sergeant within the company on a 10-year contract that would be ending in 7 years' time. Sir Bryden he had last seen at Winterfell 6 weeks prior when he had dispatched him with his mission. Sir Brynden had been deeply upset, but Ned trusted no one else within the north to do as he had asked of him. The Northerners were a loyal lot, yet sometimes too loyal. He needed this witness here unharmed, and no one was more certain of ensuring that than the master of the moat. "Rise," Ned commanded. "You have served me valiantly, and I commend you both. Both of you have a place of pride at my hearth if you are ever in need of one." Both men nodded their thanks. Lord Royce moved away to go and sit with Denizorin while Sir Brynden Tully lingered. "Lord Stark," he called, his face grave. "Sir Brynden. I have stood by your family through much, Lord Stark. When my family wronged yours, I stood by you. When yours wronged mine, against my brother's wishes, I stood by you. I tell you now though, if any more of my blood is harmed upon this day, then I shall stand by you no longer." The court murmured, and Ned resisted the urge to yell at the man for his stupidity. Breathing in and composing himself, Ned responded. "Fear not, Sir Brynden. No Tully blood shall be spilt upon this day." Sir Brynden nodded and moved away, to sit with his nephew. Ned nodded at the guards and the doors were opened. Slowly a wailing cry filled the air, growing louder and louder as the witness was brought closer and closer. She came through the doors screaming like a wraith. Lysa Arryn looked the part too. Her eyes were red-rimmed and sunken in their sockets, while her face was marred with scratches and tears. Her fine clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was disheveled. She crumpled to her knees in front of the Iron Throne. "Lady Lysa," Ned said, when her sobbing subsided a little. "I have dragged you before this throne today to answer for crimes that you and Petyr Baelish have been accused of. Tell me now, before gods and men, what part did you have in the death of Jon Arryn?" "No part. No part. No part," she shrieked. "It was the Lannisters. It was all the Lannisters. Ask the Queen. She's guilty. She killed him." Cersei stood up in anger and went to yell, only for her father to drag her back down when Ned shot him a look. A match of whispering erupted between the two, but thankfully it did not reach Ned's ears. "So someone did kill Jon Arryn. He didn't die of natural causes." "No. They poisoned him." "Poisoned him?" Ned asked. "What did they poison him with?" "The tears. The tears of lies." Ned nodded. This was no new news. He looked to the stands, where many a lord looked confused. Petyr Baelish on the other hand, looked very nervous. This was beginning to strike close to home. "And how do you know all this?" Ned asked. "Petyr told me." Ned nodded. "So Petyr Baelish told you that the hand of the king had been poisoned with the tears of lies by the Lannisters, you say, by the Queen's command in particular?" Lysa shuddered before him before beginning to mumble to herself. Ned nodded. "Well, none can deny that Petyr Baelish had some part in the plot now. How else would he know all of these things?" All eyes turned to Petyr, who smiled and stepped forth. Ned gave him no chance to respond though. He would have this man's head, even if it was the last thing he ever did. "Petyr Baelish, for your crimes, I strip you and your descendants of all lands, incomes and titles. All your current lands, incomes and titles are granted to the crown, and your wealth to be seized for the repaying the kingdom's debts. Lastly, I sentence you to death. My sword, Tommen." "Petyr!" Lady Lysa cried when she saw him. "No, Petyr. I love you." The lady burst free from the guards who restrained her and ran across the throne room as if she was chased by Jon Arryn's ghost. She ran to Petyr Baelish and threw herself into his arms. "Petyr!" she sobbed, while Petyr Baelish tried to untangle himself from her grasp. "All I did for you," she said. "I got you a position on the council and I killed Jon for you. I put the tears in his wine. I carried your babe for you. I burned the wolf bitch's letter for you and sent her wild brother to the city for you. Everything I have done for you. Don't deny me now. Let me die with you too." Ned had been turned around to seize ice from its scabbard when he heard her words. His hands were already on the hilt of his sword, and it was the first time outside of the bedchamber that Ned had felt the wolf's blood pumping through his veins. His heart thundered in his ears as he comprehended the madwoman's words. His hands trembled around the blade, and he yanked it loose with a guttural roar of rage that Ned had never felt before. Skirling jumped to his feet and let forth a howl that rang through the ears of everyone in the room. Ned spun around, the Valyrian steel glittering darkly in the low light, before slamming it down straight into the stone floor. Such was the strength of his blow and the rage that coursed through him that the blade passed through the stone like butter, before stopping when it was a third of the way in. "What did you just say?" Ned snarled. Petter Baelish threw the woman away from him. "What madness are you speaking, woman? I told you to do none of those things." "What did you mean?" Ned thundered at the former lady of the Uri. She quailed before him, before bursting into sobs and then fainting. Ned turned on Baelish, his teeth bared. "What did she mean?" His voice low and dangerous. Skirling advanced on Baelish and Baelish scrambled backwards. "I don't know," Petter cried, "the woman is clearly soft in the head." Ned took 3 steps forward and seized Petter Baelish by the throat, before throwing him backwards. The Lord of the Littlest Finger fell backwards and his head cracked against the stone floor. He scrambled backwards, away from the raging Lord of Winterfell. Ned turned around and shielded his face from the Lord's present. The room was dead silent but for the sound of Baelish's labored breathing. Ned breathed in and composed himself before turning around. Tears dripped down his cheeks, and his eyes were as wild his second eldest son's. "Lord Marndale," he said with a detached air that he didn't even recognize. "Find me some branding irons." Ned watched Petter Baelish's eyes widen in fear. He relished in it in a way he had never relished anything before. "Lord Bolton," Ned said next. "Bring me your flaying knives." Ned turned back to Baelish as his 2 lords rushed away to get him what he had asked of them. "I always wondered what it would take for me to lose my honor," Ned said calmly, his eyes unseeing. "For years I have let it define me. It was given to me by Jon Arryn. I have worn it every day like an armor. I guess it fits then, that as he leaves this world so does my honor." Ned looked up, his eyes blazing. "I will have the truth from one of you before this day is done. Please, for the sake of my anger, attempt to deny me of it. I want to see you suffer, Baelish. I want to see you suffer like never before. I want to see you scream and cry and beg for mercy. Mercy that you will not find." Petter paused, before turning to the lords in the stands. "Bear witness, my lords. Bear witness and remember me. Remember me when Lord Stark is leading his armies south to pillage and rape his way from Seaguard to Sunspear. Remember me when Northmen are burning your castles to the ground and taking your riches. Remember me as the man who tried to stand against it. We know what they are after. They are after a crown." The burnt Lord Petter spat the name in disgust, announced it for all the realm to know and hear in the damn treaty he signed with the dumb, whoring oaf who is now our king. The only way he will ever get that throne is by defeating those who can take it from him. Which is all of you. They will remember you. Ned whispered as he nodded. They will remember you in the same way they remember Rhaegar and Aerys. They will remember you as they remember the Targaryens. As a warning of what not to do. Of who not to cross. Ned turned to Lords Bolton and Marndale who had returned moments ago with the items he had asked for. He took the iron from Lord Marndale's hands and placed them in the brazier next to the Iron Throne. "Seize him," Ned commanded. The guards rushed in from the walls, and grasped Petter around the shoulders. Ned glanced at the prone form of Lysa Tully, before nodding at his guards. "Seize her too. And someone wake her up." As the guards rushed to do as he asked, Sir Bryden Tully stood up from his seat. "Ned," he cried, "you swore she would not be harmed." Ned glared at the master of the moat coldly. "I lied," he snarled, before turning back to his captives. Someone had managed to wake the lady with a bucket of water. Ned picked up one of the flaying knives that had been placed in front of him. "So," he asked, "who is first?" Hours later, when the sun had set and the stars were high in the sky, Ned had his confession. He knew the truth now, the whole truth. The lords in the stands were all pale and shaking, though whether that was from what Petter Baelish had revealed or what they had just seen Ned didn't know. Ned reached back for his sword, which was still stuck in the stone floor. Ned's rage had cooled and he struggled to drag it from the rock into which he had thrust it. Eventually he did, and he called for a block. Lord Karstark brought it over, and he placed it down gingerly, as if afraid of it. "Bring her here," Ned said. His guards brought her over and forced her to her knees on the ironwood block in front of him. Her head was pushed onto it. In the stands, a commotion occurred as Sir Brynden Tully got to his feet. He was dressed in the same armor he had been wearing when he had arrived. It was the ceremonial armor of the Master of the Moat. It was fine plate armor, forged by the best armorers in the north and had a natural blue tinge to it. It clanged loudly as Sir Brynden marched down the stands and to where Ned stood next to his niece. The Master of the Moat reached up and yanked off his helm. He threw it at Ned's feet, before undoing the clasps of his armor and throwing that at Ned's feet too. "Curse you!" He spat as tears poured down his cheeks. "Curse you and all your family!" With that he turned and stormed out of the hall. Ned turned back to Lysa Tully and glared upon her with his blazing, glazed eyes. "I say,